There is a town in America that does not appear on any map. It has a nuclear power plant, a lemon tree that the residents once went to war over, a gorge that people keep falling into, a monorail that ran for exactly 1 day, and a harbor that seems to belong to whatever coast the story needs it to belong to that week. The people who live there have yellow skin, 4 fingers on each hand, eyes that sit a little too far apart and a little too wide. They have been the same age for 36 years. None of them find this strange. The town is called Springfield, and it has been sitting inside televisions around the world since December of 1989, quietly accumulating mysteries that nobody has ever satisfactorily explained. Tonight, we are going to walk through those mysteries together, slowly, without urgency, the way you might explore a place you have always been curious about but never had the time to really look at. So settle in, get comfortable, let your breathing slow a little, and let Springfield open up around you the way it always does, with that familiar theme, that familiar couch, that familiar family tumbling into frame right on cue. We have got a long, quiet night ahead of us, and Springfield has been waiting. Section 1. The Town That Time Forgot. Springfield's impossible geography and why no map can contain it. Let's begin somewhere simple, or at least somewhere that seems simple until you pull at it. Where is Springfield? That question has been asked and deflected and teased and dodged for the entire run of the show, and by now it has become something of a joke shared between the writers and the audience. A wink. A tradition. Every few seasons, the show dangles a clue and then snatches it back before anyone can do anything with it. It has become its own kind of recurring gag, almost as reliable as the couch opening. But there is something underneath that joke worth sitting with tonight. Because the longer you think about Springfield's location, the more you realize that the geography isn't just vague. It is actively, deliberately, systematically impossible. And that impossibility, when you stop laughing at it and start examining it, tells you something very specific about what kind of place Springfield is. Let's lay out what we actually know. Springfield has mountains. In various episodes, you can see them in the background. Snow-capped, substantial, the kind of mountains that suggest an elevation and a climate that belongs somewhere in the American West or Northwest. They are not background decoration. They are specific enough that you could point at them and name a range if you were willing to guess. Springfield also has an ocean, or at least a harbor. Episodes set on the waterfront show boats, piers, a genuine coastal character that belongs to a town that has grown up alongside saltwater. The harbor has come up in enough storylines that it is clearly meant to be a real feature of the town, not an occasional dream sequence geography. Springfield also has farmland. Rolling fields outside the town limits, the kind of slow, flat agricultural stretch that belongs to the Midwest, to places like Iowa or Indiana or southern Illinois, where the sky is enormous and the land goes on until it doesn't. And Springfield has a desert. Episodes have placed the town within driving distance of dramatic arid landscapes, the kind of hard, pale ground and sparse scrub vegetation that belongs to the Southwest, to Nevada or Arizona, to places where the heat sits on you and the rocks are the color of rust. Mountains, ocean, farmland, desert, all within a reasonable distance of the same town. No place in America has all of those things within a single afternoon's drive. You can get close in certain parts of California, but not that close, and not with a Midwest character layered over all of it. What Springfield describes, geographically, is a composite. It is every American landscape assembled in the same place at the same time. And then there are the states. Across the run of the show, Springfield has been placed near Ohio, it has been placed near Nevada, it has been placed near Maine, it has been placed near Kentucky. Various episodes have put it within driving distance of Canada, within driving distance of Mexico, and in one memorable case, within driving distance of what appears to be the Pacific Northwest. The state abbreviation shown in certain episodes is NT, which does not correspond to any real American state. In another episode, when Homer calls the state capital, the voice on the other end identifies the state as one that begins with a vowel, which narrows the field down to 8 states. That sounds like progress until you remember that in other episodes, the clues point to states that begin with consonants. The show gives you answers and then contradicts them. It opens a door and closes it before you can step through. Matt Groening, the creator of the show, addressed this directly in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He said he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, because that was the name of the city near where he grew up. He wanted a name common enough that people all over the country might assume it was their Springfield, the one nearest to them, the one they recognized. There are over 30 Springfields in the United States. Almost every region has one. Choosing that name was an act of deliberate universality. For approximately 48 hours, the mystery was solved. Springfield was Oregon. Groening had said so on the record. And then the show continued airing episodes that made no geographic sense if Springfield was in Oregon. The writers did not honor the confession. The mystery was restored. It continued as if the interview had never happened, because for the show, the interview did not change anything. Springfield being vaguely Oregon was never the point. Springfield being everywhere was always the point. Now there is the surface reading of this, the one that is true and correct and that the show's creators have confirmed many times. Springfield is deliberately universal. It is designed to feel like the town you grew up in regardless of your actual zip code. The industrial plant, the suburban houses, the diner, the bar, the church, the elementary school, the cemetery on the hill. These are the bones of every American town assembled into a single place, so that no viewer ever has to feel like this story is happening somewhere foreign. Springfield belongs to everyone because it has been carefully constructed to belong to no one in particular. That is the intentional design philosophy, and it works beautifully. The show would not have lasted 36 years if it felt regional. But there is something else worth considering when you look at Springfield's geography from a different angle, when you stop asking where it is and start asking what it is. Because Springfield does not just borrow features from other places, it combines them in ways that should not be physically possible. Mountains and oceans separated by thousands of miles in the real world are separated by maybe 20 minutes of driving in Springfield. Desert and farmland, which belong to entirely different climate zones with entirely different soil profiles and rainfall patterns, exist within the same county boundaries. The town is not just set in a generic American location. The town is set in an American location that could not exist. And here is where the geography starts to rhyme with everything else about Springfield. The characters in this town do not age. The timeline drifts and reshapes itself. Catastrophic events happen and get forgotten. The power plant leaks and nobody investigates. A man lives for over 100 years and nobody finds it particularly alarming. The geography should not work, and neither should anything else. And the show has been building a world where the rules simply do not apply in the ways we expect them to. When you start seeing the geography as part of that larger pattern rather than as a standalone quirk, it starts to feel less like a production convenience and more like a statement about the nature of the place itself. Springfield does not follow the rules of American geography for the same reason it does not follow the rules of American biology or American time. Something about Springfield exists outside the normal constraints of the world. Whether that something is radiation, or collective denial, or the dreaming mind of a man in a hospital bed, the effect is the same. The town does not obey the world. The world bends to accommodate the town. And the geography is simply the most literal version of that bending. Mountains next to ocean, next to desert, next to farmland. Every landscape compressed into a single impossible place, the way every American experience is compressed into a single impossible family. Now, there is a specific episode worth pausing on here. Season 12's mockumentary Behind the Laughter, which was framed as a documentary about the Simpson family and their rise to fame, actually stated Springfield's location explicitly. In the original broadcast, the family was described as being from northern Kentucky, concrete, specific, on the record. But in syndicated reruns, that line was changed. The location became a different state entirely. The answer that the show gave you in one version of the episode was quietly altered in another version, so that depending on which broadcast you watched, Springfield was in two different places. The show gave you the truth and then changed the truth depending on the platform. Even when Springfield has a definitive answer, that answer is not definitive. Think about what that means for a moment. The one episode that came closest to pinning down the geography was subsequently edited to make it less specific, less committable, less permanent. Whoever made that decision understood something important. Springfield's mystery is not a problem to be solved. It is a feature to be maintained. The ambiguity is not the show's failure to commit. The ambiguity is the show's most deliberate choice. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find. You cannot hold anyone accountable for environmental contamination if the state it is located in keeps changing. You cannot send a federal inspector to a nuclear power plant if the jurisdiction is permanently undefined. You cannot look at the map and draw a line from the cracked cooling towers to the three-eyed fish to the yellow skin of the residents if the map itself refuses to stay still. Springfield floats between states, the way it floats between decades, the way its residents float between ages, unchanged and unchanging, because the town has understood something very early on that most places only discover after a catastrophe. Being locatable is a liability. Being findable is a risk. And the most sustainable way to avoid accountability is to make yourself impossible to pin down. There is a theory that connects Springfield's geography to the town's broader culture of collective denial. We will get into that culture in much more detail later in this script when we look at the episode that made it explicit and the community vote that made denial legally binding. But the geographic piece fits neatly into that same pattern. A town that has agreed, at some level, not to notice the things that should alarm it, would naturally extend that agreement to its own location. If you cannot find Springfield, you cannot come looking for what Springfield has done. Now, the show has played with this meta-awareness a few times in ways that are easy to miss if you are not looking for them. In one episode, a character tries to mail a letter to Springfield and realizes they do not know the state. In another, a map is shown on screen that places Springfield in a clearly contradictory location relative to earlier episodes. The show treats these moments as throwaway gags, quick jokes about its own internal inconsistency, and the audience laughs and moves on, because that is the contract. Springfield is funny. Its impossibilities are part of the joke. But underneath the joke is a town that has made itself unfindable, and a show that has been building that unfindability for 36 years with remarkable consistency. Every clue leads somewhere. Every answer raises new contradictions. Every map that seems to settle the question gets quietly revised. Springfield will never be located. Not because the show cannot decide, because the show decided a very long time ago that a town which exists everywhere cannot be held accountable to the rules of anywhere. And that, when you sit with it for long enough, is less funny and more unsettling than it first appears. But tonight, we are not here to be unsettled. We are here to let Springfield wash over us slowly, the way it always does. Episode after episode, season after season, its impossible geography wrapping around you like a familiar blanket you have had so long, you have stopped questioning where it came from. The mountains are there, the ocean is there, the farmland stretches out past the edge of town, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, the Simpson house sits on Evergreen Terrace, exactly where it has always been, exactly where it will always be, in the town that cannot be found, but somehow, every time you turn on the television, is right there waiting. Let that settle. If you are watching this in the middle of the night, or early in the morning when the rest of your house is quiet, drop a comment with where you are and what time it is. There is something comforting about knowing people all over the world are falling asleep to the same questions. And if you want more nights like this one, subscribing takes about 2 seconds and it means the next one finds you automatically. Okay, back to Springfield. Section 2, The Yellow Question. Why every resident of Springfield looks the way they do, and what the show has been telling you since Season 2. There is a question so obvious that it took years for anyone to ask it seriously. Why is everyone in Springfield yellow? The answer that the show offers, implicitly, through the logic of its own existence, is that this is just what the show looks like. It is an art style, a visual shorthand. Matt Groening wanted his characters to be identifiable from across the room, at a glance, even on a small television screen from a distance. Yellow skin reads instantly. You know you are watching The Simpsons the moment you see that color. It is a branding decision as much as a creative one, and it works. The yellow is iconic. The yellow is the show. That is the surface answer, and it is completely true as far as it goes. But there is another layer underneath it, and the show has been building that layer for 36 seasons with a patience and a consistency that is either a remarkable coincidence or one of the most sophisticated long-form jokes in the history of television. Let's go back to Season 2. 1990. The show is barely a year old and already it is dropping something extraordinary into the plot with almost no fanfare. A fish is pulled from a river near the Springfield nuclear power plant. The fish has 3 eyes. The show treats this as a comedic beat, almost a throwaway. A local catches a fish with an extra eye and suddenly the town is in an uproar. A gubernatorial candidate named Mary Bailey uses the fish as evidence that Mr. Burns is poisoning the local environment. Burns responds by appearing on television and eating the fish to demonstrate that it is perfectly safe. The town watches, briefly registers concern, and then moves on to other things. The fish's name is Blinky, and Blinky is the beginning of something. Here is the question that the episode raises and then immediately walks away from. If the fish in the river near the nuclear power plant have 3 eyes, what does that mean for the people drinking the water from that same river? What does that mean for the children swimming in it? What does that mean for the families cooking with it, bathing in it, consuming it every single day for decades? The episode does not answer that question. Nobody asks it. The gubernatorial election cycle moves on. Burns wins, the fish story fades, and life in Springfield continues exactly as it was. Except Blinky is still in that river. The mutation that produced him did not disappear when the news cycle ended. Whatever in that water created a 3-eyed fish is still in that water, still flowing, still present in every glass poured from every tap in every home in Springfield. And the people of Springfield are yellow. Now, here is where it gets interesting, and I want you to hold this thought gently because it sounds almost too neat when you say it plainly. When outside characters come to visit Springfield, when guest stars appear, when people who live somewhere other than Springfield walk into the frame, they look different. Not slightly different. Meaningfully different. Their proportions are more natural. Their eyes are more normally placed. Their skin does not have that particular golden hue. They look, in a word, more realistic, more human in a conventional anatomical sense. The show has a consistent visual distinction between people who are from Springfield and people who are not. The official explanation for this is that the art style uses more realistic proportions for guest characters to make them recognizable. If a celebrity appears in the show, you need to be able to identify them, and the distorted proportions of regular Simpsons characters would make that identification difficult. So, outside characters get drawn closer to real human anatomy. That explanation is entirely reasonable. It is almost certainly true from a production standpoint, but it creates a fascinating wrinkle within the internal logic of the show's universe. Because inside that universe, there is a visible, observable, consistent difference between people who live in Springfield and people who do not. The insiders have the yellow skin, the wide-set eyes, the unusual proportions, the 4 fingers. The outsiders look normal. If you were watching this show as a documentary rather than a cartoon, if you were treating Springfield as a real place with real residents, the conclusion you would draw from this consistent visual distinction would be immediate. Something is different about the people who live here. The nuclear power plant has had 342 documented safety violations. The show establishes this in a single episode and then never fully returns to it. 342 violations. The estimated cost to bring the facility up to code was $56 million. Burns refused to spend it. Not because he could not afford it, the show has established at various points that he is worth many times that figure, but because spending the money would mean acknowledging that the violations existed, and acknowledging that they existed would mean someone might start asking questions about what 30 years of those violations had already done to the town. Among those violations, the show depicts radioactive waste being dumped directly into local bodies of water, into the river where Blinky was caught, into the water supply that feeds the taps in the Simpson kitchen and every other kitchen in Springfield. The power plant also has cracked cooling towers, patched with what the show describes as chewing gum. It has glowing rods handled without proper containment. It has luminescent rats running through its lower levels. It has Homer Simpson serving as its primary safety inspector, a role he performs while sleeping at his workstation and eating donuts during meltdown warnings. And at the center of all of it is a man named Charles Montgomery Burns, who is himself so saturated with the effects of radiation that his body emits a visible green glow after his weekly medical treatments. Burns does not appear yellow. Burns glows. His body has been so fundamentally altered by exposure to nuclear material that he radiates visible light and requires ongoing intervention to maintain any kind of biological stability. The yellow of Springfield's residents and the green of Burns's glow exist on a spectrum. They are the same story told at different intensities. Burns is at one extreme end of what radiation does to a body. The rest of Springfield is somewhere in the middle, altered but not yet luminescent, changed but not yet glowing. And in between them is the river with the 3-eyed fish, flowing past the elementary school playground, past the houses on Evergreen Terrace, past the Quickie Mart where Homer stops every morning for a donut he does not need. The show has never stated plainly that the yellow skin is a symptom of environmental contamination. It does not need to. It has placed every piece of evidence in front of you across 36 seasons and trusted you to assemble the picture yourself. The three-eyed fish, the safety violations, the cracked cooling towers, the dumped waste, the glowing billionaire, the visual distinction between Springfield residents and everyone else, the four fingers, the unusual skull shapes, the recovery rates from injuries that should be fatal. Homer has been shot, electrocuted, fallen off cliffs, been hit by cars, survived explosions, been buried alive, been struck by falling objects that would reduce a normal human skeleton to something unrecognizable. In every case, he recovers. Not just recovers, but bounces back with a speed and completeness that the show treats as comedic, as just another Homer thing, just what happens when Homer is around. The radiation theory has a specific answer for this. If chronic exposure to low-level radiation has fundamentally altered the cellular biology of Springfield residents over decades of exposure, the resulting mutations would not necessarily express themselves in the same way across every body. In some people, the mutation might reduce cognitive function. In some people, it might accelerate healing. In some people, it might do both. The mutation is not a single, clean outcome. It is a cascade of biological changes that expresses differently in every individual, depending on their particular genetics, their duration of exposure, their age at initial exposure, and any number of other variables that the show cannot and does not specify because it is a cartoon, not a biology textbook. But the pattern is there. Homer heals faster than any human should heal. Marge's hair has maintained the same physically impossible vertical structure for her entire adult life, without product and without visible mechanical support. Lisa's saxophone playing is so accomplished for an 8-year-old that it should be statistically remarkable, and yet the show treats it as given. Maggie, who we will spend a great deal of time with later in this script, demonstrates cognitive abilities that no 1-year-old should possess. Bart's physical resilience, his ability to survive falls and crashes and impacts that should leave lasting damage, mirrors his father's in ways that suggest a hereditary component to whatever is happening in these bodies. And then there are the animals. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same visual characteristics as his owners. The same wide-set eyes, the same proportional anomalies. The family's pet, raised in Springfield, drinking Springfield water, living under the same contaminated sky, looks exactly like a dog version of the Simpson family. Blinky had 3 eyes because the river water created a mutation in fish biology that the show presents explicitly as radiation exposure. The show tells you directly, through the gubernatorial campaign subplot, that the 3 eyes are a result of the plant's runoff. It is not subtext, it is text. Burns's plant mutated the fish. The question the show leaves dangling, the question it has been leaving dangling since 1990, is whether it stopped at the fish. Now, there is a version of this theory that is more disturbing than the mutation story and more interesting. What if the yellow is not a side effect of the radiation? What if the yellow is the radiation's most efficient achievement? What if decades of exposure at exactly the right levels created not random biological chaos, but a very specific biological outcome? An outcome that Burns, who understands radiation better than anyone in Springfield because he is personally dependent on managing its effects in his own body, might have intended or at least found useful? A population with compromised cognitive function cannot effectively organize against the man who employs most of them. A population whose healing rate is enhanced becomes a labor force that can work in dangerous conditions without suffering the kind of catastrophic workforce losses that would draw regulatory attention. A population with altered stress response biology might find it harder to sustain the kind of outrage that produces political action. The radiation theory, in its simplest form, says Burns is poisoning Springfield. In its more developed form, it suggests that the poisoning is less like an accident and more like a management strategy. That the specific biological effects the radiation has produced in Springfield's residents are not collateral damage but are, in some meaningful sense, the point. The yellow skin is just the most visible part of it. The part you can see from across the room, the way Groening intended when he chose it for his characters, without perhaps fully knowing what subtext he was encoding into the image. Or perhaps knowing exactly. Groening has said in interviews that the show is a satire of American corporate culture, of working-class life under institutional pressure, of the way large systems grind individuals down over generations. If you accept that framing, the yellow skin is not just a design choice. It is the show's central metaphor made literal and visible. These are people who have been colored by the system that surrounds them. They have taken on the hue of their environment, the way everything eventually takes on the hue of what it is immersed in. The water is contaminated. The air is contaminated. The food grown near the plant is contaminated. The river is contaminated. And the people drinking from that river for 30 years are yellow. Blinky had 3 eyes. Nobody asked why. Springfield is yellow. Nobody asks why. That is the show. That has always been the show. The answers are right there on the surface, visible to anyone willing to look at them without flinching. And the most remarkable thing about Springfield is not the mystery, but the willingness, the practiced, comfortable, collective willingness not to see it. We are going to return to that willingness several more times tonight. It is one of Springfield's most consistent and most extraordinary features. For now, let the yellow sit with you. Let it be what it is. A color, a design choice, a satire, a symptom, all of those things at once, layered over each other the way Springfield layers everything, until the surface looks simple and the depth looks endless. Close your eyes for a moment if you want. The yellow is still there. It always is. Section 3. The crayon, the clock, and the man who chose to stay asleep. Homer's intelligence and the life he never got to live. There is an episode of The Simpsons from its 12th season that does not get discussed as much as it should. It is a quiet episode in some ways, not a landmark, not a cultural event. Just a story about Homer finding out something that changes everything and then choosing to unchange it. The episode is called Home, and it is about a crayon. The setup is this. Homer participates in a medical study, and during a routine scan, the doctors discover a foreign object lodged in his brain. It has been there since childhood. A standard yellow crayon, jammed up through his nasal passage and embedded in the soft tissue of his frontal lobe. The doctors offer to remove it. Homer agrees. What follows is one of the stranger and more emotionally resonant subplots the show ever produced. With the crayon removed, Homer's intelligence skyrockets. His IQ, which the show has previously established at a clinical 55, climbs to a level that makes him, by the show's own reckoning, smarter than everyone around him. He starts reading. He starts engaging with complex ideas. He starts understanding the world at a depth that was simply not available to him before. He forms a real intellectual friendship with Lisa, the one person in his family who has always been operating at a level nobody could reach. And he is miserable. The misery is not incidental. It is the whole point. Homer, with full cognitive function, looks at his life and finds it unbearable. Not because his life is objectively worse than he thought it was, but because he can now see all of it clearly. He can see the job he has been doing for decades and understand what it actually is. He can see the town he has lived in his whole life and understand its reality. He can see the systems around him and trace their logic to their sources. Intelligence in Springfield is not a gift. It is a form of suffering. He asks the doctor to put the crayon back. The doctor does. Homer's IQ drops back to 55. The clarity evaporates. The heaviness lifts. And he returns to his couch, his beer, his donuts, his cheerful and catastrophic employment at the nuclear power plant, content in a way he could not be when he understood what that contentment was covering. Now, the episode plays this choice as bittersweet. It acknowledges both the loss and the relief. It does not celebrate stupidity exactly, but it does not condemn Homer for his decision. It treats his choice with a genuine compassion, an understanding that for some people, in some circumstances, the fog is mercy. That is the emotional truth the episode is after, and it earns it. But there is a logistical question underneath the emotional one that the episode never asks and the show never answers. How did a crayon get lodged in a child's brain without anyone noticing? Homer went through his entire childhood with a foreign object embedded in his frontal lobe. He went through adolescence, through young adulthood, through years of employment at a nuclear power plant, getting routine physicals, being seen by Springfield's medical professionals, navigating a healthcare system that theoretically exists and functions, and not a single doctor in all of that time identified a foreign object in his skull. Either the medical establishment in Springfield is comprehensively incompetent beyond any reasonable statistical probability, or someone knew the crayon was there and chose to leave it. The show does not say which. It simply drops the question and moves on. But sit with the second possibility for a moment, because it connects to something larger. Burns needs Homer. The show establishes this in a very specific way during an episode where German investors purchase the nuclear power plant, and their first action is to fire Homer. The second action is to assess the cost of bringing the facility up to code, which nearly bankrupts them within weeks. They sell the plant back to Burns at a loss. Burns, upon reacquiring the plant, immediately rehires Homer. The connection the show draws is explicit. A competent safety inspector at the Springfield nuclear power plant would discover the violations, report them, and trigger a remediation process that would cost tens of millions of dollars and potentially expose Burns's decades of environmental crimes. Homer is not just a bad safety inspector. Homer is the perfect safety inspector for a man who needs the violations to continue. Homer walks past the cracked cooling towers and does not see them as cracked. He pats the glowing waste drums and does not think about what is inside. He falls asleep at his console and dreams about donuts, while the instruments do whatever they do. Homer's incompetence is Burns's most valuable operational asset. Now add the crayon. Homer's natural intelligence, demonstrated clearly in the HOMR episode, would make him a very different kind of employee. The version of Homer who can read scientific papers, who can form complex analytical judgments, who can understand the relationship between industrial contamination and biological mutation, that Homer would not stay at the nuclear plant for long, that Homer would notice things, ask questions, make connections, potentially become a problem. The foggy Homer, the one with his cognitive function reduced to a clinical disability by a crayon lodged in his frontal lobe, will never be that kind of problem. He will go to work every day, eat his donuts, fail to notice the radiation, smile at his boss, and drive home in a car that is held together by habit and luck. Burns could not have designed a more useful employee. Whether any of this was planned, whether there is a genuine conspiracy behind the crayon, the show does not commit to saying. It raises the question and leaves it hanging in the air, like so many things in Springfield, visible enough to see but unexamined enough to ignore. But there is a deeper layer to the crayon story than the conspiracy angle, and it is the one that stays with you longest after the episode ends. When Homer gets the crayon removed and becomes intelligent, and then chooses to have it replaced, he makes that choice with full clarity. He understands exactly what he is giving up. He knows what his life looks like from the outside. He knows what intelligence feels like, what it offers, what doors it opens, and he chooses to close all of those doors and go back to the fog. Why? The episode gives you one answer. The smart version of Homer is lonely. He cannot connect with his friends in the same way. He cannot share the comfortable, low-resolution pleasures that make his life livable. He is too aware of everything that is wrong, and too capable of understanding how little power he has to fix any of it. The fog protects him from that awareness. The fog makes the beer taste better, and the TV shows funnier and the couch softer. The fog is home. That is one answer. But there is another possible answer, one the episode does not articulate directly. Homer chooses to put the crayon back because being smart in Springfield is a kind of exile. It is what happens to Lisa every single day of her life. Lisa is brilliant and principled and perceptive, and Springfield treats her with a combination of mild admiration and persistent dismissal. She is always the smartest person in the room, and it never helps her. The room does not want to be improved by its smartest occupant. The room wants to continue being the room. Homer watched his daughter fight that battle her entire life. He understood, in the 12 or so days of clarity he experienced with the crayon out, what it meant to be Lisa. And he chose not to be Lisa. He chose the room. That choice is heartbreaking in ways the episode acknowledges, but does not fully dwell on, because the show is a comedy and comedies do not dwell. But you can feel the weight of it in the final scenes. Homer lying back in the doctor's chair, the crayon going back in, the light behind his eyes dimming slightly, not in a dramatic or theatrical way, but in the quiet, specific way of something being closed. And then he is Homer again. Good old Homer. Walking out into the Springfield sunshine, not thinking about the cooling towers, not thinking about the contamination, not thinking about the man who built the plant or the crayon in his head, or the mother who was driven away, or the deal his father made, or any of the architectural facts of his own suffering. Just Homer, walking home, happy enough. The show produced one of its most devastating commentaries on working-class life in America inside a joke about a crayon and played it so gently that you could almost watch it as pure comedy and never feel the weight underneath. Almost. Now there is a temporal element to all of this that connects Homer's intelligence to the broader mysteries of Springfield's timeline. The Simpsons uses what the industry calls a floating timeline. The show's present is always the viewer's present. When it aired in 1990, the characters were living in 1990. When it airs in 2025, they are living in 2025. The technology changes, the cultural references update, but the characters remain exactly the same age they have always been. Homer is still in his mid-30s, Bart is still 10, Lisa is still 8. The floating timeline creates a specific paradox when applied to Homer's biography. Early in the show's run, Homer and Marge's backstory was anchored to the late 1970s. They were high school sweethearts in an era of disco and bell-bottoms and Watergate. The nostalgia of those flashback episodes had a specific texture, a specific smell, an American memory of a particular decade. But if Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they did not grow up in the 1970s. They grew up in the 2000s. And so the show has returned to their origin story multiple times over the decades, each retelling moving their formative years forward to match the current timeline. They were disco kids. Then they were grunge fans. Then they were something else entirely. Their shared past keeps getting rewritten to fit a present that has kept moving while they have stayed still. Homer does not have a fixed history. He has a series of drafts. His memories are not stable because the timeline keeps revising them. He is the same man in every version of the story, and yet the story keeps changing around him. This is what the floating timeline does to a character over 36 years. It makes their past into something malleable, something that shifts to serve the narrative present without worrying too much about internal consistency. Homer's biography is not a fixed document. It is a living thing that keeps adapting. And underneath all of those adaptations, underneath every version of Homer's childhood and adolescence and early adulthood, there is the crayon, the one constant, the thing that has always been there, in every iteration of the story, lodged in the same place, doing the same quiet damage. Whatever version of Homer's past you are working with in any given episode, the crayon is present in all of them. Maybe that is the most consistent thing about Homer. Not the donuts, or the beer, or the couch, or the job. The thing embedded in his brain that keeps him from becoming something else. That has always been there. That nobody ever removed until he was old enough to choose to have it put back. One more thing about Homer and intelligence before we move on. The show, in a Season 4 episode called Homer the Heretic, has Homer meet God. An actual face-to-face conversation. God has a face and a voice and a presence and speaks to Homer directly. And in that conversation, God tells Homer that he will learn the meaning of life, but not yet. God tells Homer that his time is coming. 6 months after that episode aired, there was a coma episode. We are going to spend a long time with that coma later in this script, but hold that God conversation in mind as we continue. Hold the image of Homer sitting across from the divine and being told that his time is coming, and the way the show placed that conversation exactly half a year before the event that the Homer coma theory identifies as the moment Homer's waking life ended. Prophecy or coincidence? The show does not tell you. It rarely does. Let your mind rest with Homer for a moment. The comfortable Homer, the one who chose the fog, sitting on his couch in the blue light of the television, not thinking about crayons or cooling towers or mothers who vanished in the night, just watching whatever is on, perfectly content with what he cannot see. That is one way to be in the world. Springfield has a lot of residents who have learned that particular skill. Section 4, The Woman Who Vanished. Mona Simpson, Mr. Burns, and the conspiracy that shaped 3 generations. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the established fact. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, told his son that his mother had passed away when Homer was young. He showed Homer a grave. Homer grew up believing he was a boy whose mother had died, and he carried that belief into adulthood, into marriage, into fatherhood, into every relationship he ever formed. The absence of Mona Simpson was not a plot point that the show addressed directly in those early seasons. It was ambient, background, a fact about Homer that shaped the texture of who he was without ever needing to be explained in detail. And then Season 7 happened, the episode called Mother Simpson. The 19th of November, 1995. Homer fakes his own death to avoid working on a Saturday, a very Homer way of solving a problem. He pushes a dummy off a cliff near the power plant. The town believes he is dead. Marge, reasonably, insists he correct the municipal record. Homer goes to the Hall of Records. And there, in the official documentation of Springfield's vital statistics, he finds something that upends everything. His mother is alive. She has always been alive. The grave Abe showed him belonged to someone named Walt Whitman, the poet, a name Abe had chosen because it was on a nearby headstone, and it seemed plausible enough to a grieving child. Homer's mother did not die. She vanished. And the reason she vanished is one of the most quietly devastating stories the show ever told. Mona Simpson, in 1969, was a housewife. She was married to Abe. She had a young son named Homer. She was ordinary in all the ways the show later depicts her earlier life, a woman living a quiet life in Springfield while the world outside was in the middle of one of its most turbulent decades. The civil rights movement was reshaping American law. The counterculture was reshaping American identity. Vietnam was reshaping American grief. And Mona, sitting in her kitchen in Springfield, began paying attention to the world in a way she had not before. She became radicalized. The show depicts this with its characteristic mix of comedy and genuine emotional weight. She joined a group of activists, people the show calls hippies but whose cause the show presents as legitimate and morally serious. They targeted a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns. Let that land for a moment. Mr. Burns did not just own a nuclear power plant, he owned a germ warfare facility, a laboratory in Springfield designed to produce biological weapons, pathogens weaponized for military or commercial use, in the same town where Homer was growing up, where children were playing in the street, where families were living their daily lives without any awareness of what was happening down the road. The same man who built a nuclear reactor with 342 safety violations and dumped radioactive waste into the local river was also, in 1969, manufacturing weapon-grade biological agents in a laboratory in their community. The contamination of Springfield is not just radioactive. It has always had a biological dimension that the show raises and then, true to form, never fully develops. Mona and her group broke into the lab. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, destroying the stored biological agent. During the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, who happened to be Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid succeeded in its objective. The biological agent was neutralized, but Mona made one mistake on the way out. Someone was knocked down in the chaos. She stopped to help them, and the person she stopped to help was Mr. Burns. She saw his face. More importantly, he saw hers. Burns identified her to the FBI, and from that moment, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not explain to Abe what had happened. She could not hold her son, or tell him she was leaving, or make any of the arrangements that might have made the separation legible to a child who would spend the next 27 years believing his mother had chosen to die rather than stay with him. She kissed Homer goodnight while he was sleeping, sometime in 1969, and disappeared. Homer woke up and his mother was gone. Now, the show does something very specific with this revelation. It does not just give Homer his mother back and let the reunion be the conclusion of the story. The episode gives Homer one afternoon with Mona, a genuine, fragile, beautiful afternoon in which 36 years of missed time exist in every word they exchange, and then Burns spots her through a cab window and calls the FBI, and Mona has to run again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time, and this time he knows why she is leaving. He knows who forced her out in the first place. He knows that the man responsible for the absence that has defined his entire emotional life is the same man whose parking lot he drives through every morning on the way to work. Homer does not connect these dots in any actionable way. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He does not even seem to fully process, in any scene the show gives us, the direct and specific connection between the billionaire who signs his paycheck and the billionaire who destroyed his family. And this, the show makes clear, is not carelessness. It is consequence. Homer cannot make that connection because making that kind of connection requires a cognitive clarity that Homer no longer has. The crayon, the radiation, the decades of living in Springfield's compromised environment. The man who could have made that connection, the high IQ Homer briefly revealed in the HOMR episode, chose to have his clarity removed because clarity was too painful to sustain in this town. And the Homer who remained, the comfortable, fogged, contented Homer, simply cannot hold the shape of what he would need to hold in order to understand his own story. Burns broke him before he was old enough to understand what breaking meant, and the brokenness prevents him from ever understanding what Burns did. That is the architecture of it. The cruelty is so complete it wraps around itself. Now, the conspiracy extends further than Mona's exile. The show reveals in a later season that Abe Simpson, Homer's father, eventually made a deal with Burns. Burns had committed a crime and Abe had discovered it. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed that Homer would have a job at the plant for life. No matter how many mistakes he made, no matter how incompetent he was, no matter how many times he should have been let go, the deal would protect him. The show cites 742 documented errors on Homer's part. Homer's employment was never at genuine risk. Not because Burns is generous or forgetful, though the show sometimes plays it as the latter. Because Burns struck a deal with Homer's father that made Homer's continued employment a contractual obligation. So Homer's job, the job he goes to every morning, the job that defines his identity as a breadwinner and a functioning member of society, is not something he earned and is not something he maintains through performance. It is a deal made between his father and the man who drove his mother away. Homer's entire adult life is the consequence of that deal, and he has never known it. Abe has never told him. Burns has never told him. The deal exists in silence, maintained by all parties, shaping Homer's world without his knowledge. 3 generations of Simpsons in a relationship with Burns that none of them fully understand. Mona fought and lost. Abe made his peace and kept quiet. Homer carries the resulting damage without knowing where it came from. There is a specific thing the show does in the Mother Simpson episode that I want to pause on because it is one of the most quietly powerful images the show has ever produced. After Mona has to flee again, after the FBI arrives and she disappears back into her fugitive life, the episode ends with Homer alone. He sits on the hood of his car in the dark, looking up at the stars. No joke, no punchline, no cutaway. Just Homer sitting with his loss. The camera holds on him for a long moment, and then the episode ends. No resolution, no comfort, just a man in the dark having lost his mother twice in the same afternoon. The show earned that moment. It had built toward it through the whole episode, through the comedy and the absurdity and the characteristic Simpsons rhythm of jokes landing between serious beats, and then it stepped back and let the real thing breathe. The real thing being this: Homer Simpson has spent his entire life being shaped by an absence he did not understand and could not address and could not grieve properly, because he had been told the absence was something else entirely, something closed and finished and properly mourned. And when the absence turned out to be something living, something that still existed in the world and could theoretically be reached, it turned out to be even less resolvable than death, because Mona was alive and still unreachable, still out of reach, still in flight from the man whose shadow covered everything in Springfield. Mona died in a later season. Her death scene is one of the show's most restrained and effective dramatic moments. Homer sits with her. He holds her hand. He watches her go. No jokes. No Homer, the heretic-style divine conversation. No miracle recovery. Just the final moment, the one the show had been building towards since 1969, the last goodbye that the first goodbye had prevented. Homer lost his mother twice and got to say goodbye once. The show carries that story in its structure even when it is not explicitly referencing it. Every episode where Homer is desperate for approval, where he clings to connections, where he is terrified of abandonment, where he endures humiliation rather than risk losing someone, is a story shaped by that 1969 goodbye. Burns created the wound. Springfield perpetuated it. And Homer has been living in it, unknowingly, every single day. One more thing before we move on. Mona Simpson was a woman who looked at a biological weapons laboratory in her own town and decided that the correct response was direct action. She was a housewife who radicalized because she understood something important. The person best positioned to notice what is happening to a community is someone who lives in it, who is embedded in it, who knows its rhythms and its textures and its silences. She noticed. She acted. She paid a price that lasted the rest of her life. And in the generation after hers, the only person in the Simpson family who consistently notices things, who asks the questions nobody wants to answer, who refuses to accept the comfortable version of reality when the true version is available, is Lisa, 8 years old, playing her saxophone in her room, looking out at Springfield and seeing it clearly in a way that costs her, every single day, exactly the kind of loneliness and frustration and dismissal that her grandmother felt in a different era. The capacity to see Springfield clearly appears to run in the women of this family. Mona had it and was exiled. Lisa has it and is tolerated barely as a quirk. Maggie has it, we think, and is protecting it behind 36 years of deliberate silence. The men of the family have been managed into blindness by the same system that forced the women to choose between clarity and safety, and Burns sits at the center of all of it, ancient and patient and very much alive. We will get to Burns's particular form of survival later. For now, let Mona rest where the show leaves her, somewhere outside Springfield, somewhere beyond Burns's reach, somewhere her son can visit in memory, even if he could not reach her in life. She went underground to protect the people she loved. She just could not protect them from everything. Section 5. The shooting that was never really solved. Who shot Mr. Burns? And why the official answer still does not add up. The summer of 1995. The Simpsons had been on the air for 6 seasons. It was, by any measure, one of the most successful television shows in the world. It had already changed the grammar of animated storytelling, already produced episodes that would be discussed in film schools and cultural criticism for decades, already demonstrated that a cartoon could carry the weight of genuine satire and genuine emotion without sacrificing either. And then it attempted something that no animated show had ever tried before. A genuine whodunit. Season 6, Episode 25. Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 1. The episode aired in May 1995 and ended with the richest man in Springfield collapsed on the town sundial, 2 letters visible beneath his outstretched hands, and an entire town full of suspects. The cultural event that followed is worth describing even briefly because it tells you something about what the show was in that moment. Fox promoted the mystery like a national emergency. America's Most Wanted, the actual true crime television program, produced a tie-in special called Springfield's Most Wanted, treating the fictional shooting as an unsolved real crime. A national contest invited viewers to submit their guesses for the identity of the shooter. The winner would be animated into a future episode. The Simpsons was not just a TV show that summer, it was a puzzle the whole country was trying to solve. The setup of the mystery is worth reviewing because the evidence is the thing we need to hold on to as we work through what the show told us and what it may have concealed. Mr. Burns had gone further than he had ever gone before. He had stolen an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary School, gutting the school's budget and putting dozens of educational programs at risk. He had effectively destroyed Moe's Tavern by bankrupting its owner through a series of financial maneuvers. He had created a sinkhole that collapsed the Springfield retirement castle. He had been responsible for an injury to Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog. And for his grand finale, he had constructed a mechanical disc designed to block out the sun over the entire town, forcing every resident to purchase electricity from his power plant around the clock because natural light was no longer available. Burns literally stole the sun. Every person in Springfield had a motive. The show spent considerable time establishing this. Homer, because Burns could not remember his name despite years of employment. Bart and Lisa, because the school lost its funding. Grandpa, because the retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because he lost his job. Tito Puente, because the music program was cut. Moe, because his bar was ruined. Smithers, freshly fired for objecting to the sun-blocking scheme. The entire town, because living without sunlight is, at a basic biological and practical level, untenable. The town gathered. The confrontation happened. And then Burns collapsed with a gunshot wound. He fell onto the town sundial. His hands landed on 2 letters, W and S. Or, from Burns's own perspective, looking down at the dial from where he lay, M and S. The show told us those letters were the key. The show told us to keep them in mind. Part 2 arrived in September 1995. The investigation played out like a parody of every procedural drama, with Wiggum and the Springfield police bumbling through the evidence with their characteristic incompetence. Smithers confessed almost immediately, but his confession collapsed when it emerged that he had been blackout drunk and had actually shot someone else entirely, an elderly man named Jasper, in the wooden leg, at a different location. Wrong victim. Wrong time. Wrong crime. Other suspects fell away. Skinner had an alibi. Moe had an alibi. Tito Puente had the greatest alibi in the show's history, a full musical number explaining that he had channeled his rage into creative expression rather than violence. The investigation stalled until a key piece of biological evidence emerged. An eyelash found on Burns's suit. The DNA matched a Simpson. Homer was arrested. His fingerprints were on the gun. He had the most personal and sustained motive of anyone in town. A man who worked for Burns for years without Burns ever learning his name. Homer was about to be convicted. And then Burns woke up from his coma and identified his shooter. It was Maggie Simpson. According to Burns's account, he encountered the baby in the parking lot after the town meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop. In the struggle, his gun fell from his holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. Case closed. Baby did it. Except, let's go through the problems with this resolution in the order they appear. First, the contest. Fox invited America to solve the mystery. Thousands of entries were submitted. According to the DVD commentary for the episode, not a single person in the randomly selected sample of submitted entries guessed the correct answer. Not one. The person who received the contest prize was chosen at random from among the incorrect entries and received a cash payment instead of the promised animation appearance because there was no correct answer to reward. Think about what that means. The show told the public it was creating a solvable mystery. It promoted the contest on that basis. It invited viewers to examine the clues and arrive at the correct answer. And when the contest concluded and the entries were examined, the correct answer was not represented anywhere in the pool. The show's own creators noted in the commentary that they were aware of a single person who had posted the correct answer to an online Simpsons discussion group on the night Part 1 originally aired. But this person was using a college internet account, and by the time the contest ended and the producers tried to locate them, the account was gone. They issued an open invitation on the DVD release for this person to come forward. As far as any available record shows, they never did. The mystery that was supposedly solvable from the clues in Part 1 was not solved by anyone who submitted a contest entry. Either the clues were insufficient, the red herrings were too effective, or the answer that was eventually given did not follow logically from the evidence the show presented. The creators themselves seemed to lean toward the third option, acknowledging in the commentary that the episode had been a difficult production and that the eventual answer had been arrived at through a process that prioritized what they called narrative convenience. Second, the sundial. Burns's hands pointed to W and S. The show told us this meant Maggie Simpson, M for Maggie, S for Simpson, because Burns was looking at the letters from his own perspective, inverting them. M and S, Maggie Simpson. Burns himself stated on the record, within the episode, that the position of his hands on the sundial was not intentional. He did not deliberately fall in a way that would spell out his attacker's initials. He fell because he had been shot, and his hands landed where they landed. The central clue, the piece of evidence the show used to frame the reveal as a coherent mystery, was explicitly described by the victim as a coincidence. The biggest clue and the biggest mystery in the show's history is, according to the person it supposedly came from, meaningless. Third, the gun. Burns carried a weapon in a holster. The show establishes, for an attentive viewer, that the holster was empty before the shooting. Burns's gun was already missing from his person before he was shot. Whoever shot Burns used his own weapon. This means the shooter was someone who either pickpocketed the gun during the town meeting chaos or encountered it after it had fallen and used it in an unplanned moment of opportunity. This profile fits Maggie's version of events. It also fits a dozen other people who were not carrying their own weapons that night, who might have found the gun before Maggie did, who might have made a decision in a single impulsive moment. The gun being Burns's own weapon does not narrow the field as much as the show would like you to think. Fourth, and this is the one that nags most persistently, Burns's last words before he was shot, as established by the investigation, were, "Oh, it is you." He recognized his attacker. He was not startled. He was not afraid. He acknowledged their presence in a tone of mild recognition, the way you might greet someone you have met before but do not consider a particular threat. The way you would speak to a familiar face in an unexpected location. Does Burns have that relationship with Maggie Simpson? Has he interacted with her enough times, in enough meaningful contexts, to recognize her on sight in a parking lot and respond with calm acknowledgement? The show does not establish any prior relationship between Burns and Maggie beyond the incidental. Burns barely reliably remembers Homer's name, and Homer has worked for him for years. The idea that Burns would see a baby in a parking lot and respond with the measured recognition of, "Oh, it is you," rather than some version of, "What are you doing here?" or simple confusion, requires a prior familiarity with that specific baby that the show has not given us any reason to believe exists. Who in Springfield does Burns recognize with that particular quality of tired, unsurprised acknowledgement? The suspects with the deepest ongoing relationships with Burns are Homer, who has worked for him for years and endured his constant failure to remember him; Smithers, who manages every aspect of his life; Marge, whom Burns became infatuated with in an earlier episode, which the show references enough times to suggest it is meant to be remembered; Grandpa Simpson, who has his own tangled history with Burns. The person Burns would most plausibly recognize with the specific emotional register of, "Oh, it is you," is someone he has known for a long time, someone whose presence in that parking lot would not surprise him, even if it should. A baby he barely knows does not naturally produce that response. Fifth, Homer. In season 18, several years after the shooting, Homer makes an offhand comment claiming that he was the one who shot Burns. The show treats it as a throwaway line. Nobody investigates. Nobody follows up. Chief Wiggum does not reopen the case. The confession, if it is a confession, lands without consequence and is never addressed again. This could be Homer being Homer, saying something dramatic for attention without it being true. That is an entirely plausible reading of the moment. Homer claims a lot of things, but it could also be the show giving you a second answer, years after the first, with the confidence that by this point, the audience has accepted the Maggie resolution and will treat anything that contradicts it as a joke. The confession is wrapped in enough contextual ambiguity that it can be dismissed if you want to dismiss it. It can also be taken seriously if you want to take it seriously. The show has given itself complete deniability on both readings. Sixth, the alternate endings. A complete alternate version of Part 2 was animated and fully produced, in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter. This ending was shown in the show's 138th episode Spectacular, a clip show hosted by Troy McClure, who dismisses the Smithers ending by explaining that it would have required ignoring the Simpson DNA evidence, which would be, in his words, downright nutty. This line is itself a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, which had concluded in acquittal that same year, in which a jury did exactly that, ignored DNA evidence to reach a verdict. The show is winking at you. It is reminding you that juries and investigations ignore DNA evidence sometimes. It is reminding you that official answers are not necessarily correct answers. It is putting all of this in the mouth of a fictional host in a clip show format so that it can be plausibly denied as a bit of self-referential humor rather than a genuine interrogation of the episode's conclusion. But the alternate Smithers ending exists. It was made. It is real. The writers produced a complete, full-length version of the story in which a different character was the shooter, which means the answer was not settled by the evidence. The answer was chosen from among several possible answers that the evidence could have supported, based on factors that had more to do with narrative convenience than logical necessity. And then the most famous final shot. After the case is closed, after Burns has named Maggie, after Wiggum has delivered his line about juries and babies and the impossibility of conviction, the camera lingers on Maggie alone in a room. Everyone else is gone. She looks around carefully, deliberately, with a precision that is striking in a baby. She checks to make sure no one is watching, and then she moves her pacifier in a motion that unmistakably mimics pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read this as confirmation. Maggie knows what she did. The gesture is her private acknowledgement of her own guilt. But watch it again. What you are actually seeing is a 1-year-old performing a motion she witnessed. Babies do this. They observe the world and they repeat the patterns they see in it. They do not have the conceptual framework to understand what the patterns mean. They see a motion and they reproduce it because repetition is how infant cognition learns to categorize experience. Maggie in that final shot could be confessing, or she could be a baby who saw someone fire a gun and is doing what babies do with things they have seen. The show offers you both readings simultaneously and commits to neither. The official answer is Maggie Simpson, and yet the contest nobody won. The sundial clue that Burns himself called a coincidence. The gun that was already missing before the shooting. The recognition in Burns's voice that implies a prior relationship. The confession Homer made in season 18 that nobody followed up on. The alternate Smithers ending that was fully animated and produced. The final Maggie shot that can be read 2 different ways. What the show gave you was a closed case. What it built underneath that case was an open question. In Springfield, Those are two very different things, and the distance between them is where the most interesting version of the story lives. Let the question stay open tonight. Let it drift. There is something restful about a mystery that has been running for 30 years without resolution. Something that suggests the world is more complex than its official explanations, that the truth, wherever it is patient enough to wait. Section 6. The Silence of Maggie Simpson. What the quietest member of the family actually knows. Let us stay with Maggie for a while, because the shooting is actually the least interesting thing about her. That is a strange sentence to write about a character who shot a man, but it is accurate. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She communicates primarily through pacifier sounds and the occasional pointed facial expression. She cannot walk reliably. She cannot form sentences. She exists at the periphery of most episodes, present in the frame, part of the family tableau, but rarely the center of the story. And in that time, from that position at the margins, she has done more than almost anyone else in Springfield. She led a rebellion. Not a metaphorical rebellion, an actual organized uprising. The Ayn Rand School for Tots, the daycare facility run by the iron-handed Trudy Zangler, was an authoritarian institution where babies were conditioned toward conformity through systematic deprivation of stimulation and autonomy. Maggie, on her first day, assessed the situation, identified the oppressive structure, organized her fellow infants, and staged a coordinated escape attempt. A 1 year old assessed a political situation and responded with collective action. And then there is the short film. In 2012, a Simpsons theatrical short called The Longest Daycare was screened before Ice Age, continental drift in cinemas around the world. It ran approximately 7 minutes. It was nominated for an Academy Award. And it is, with very little hyperbole, one of the most efficient demonstrations of character intelligence in the history of the franchise. The premise involves Maggie being dropped at a different daycare facility, the Ayn Rand-adjacent Einstein School for Tots. She encounters a caterpillar preparing to enter its chrysalis. She understands what is happening to it. She decides to protect it. Another infant, a baby named Gerald, who recurs throughout the series as Maggie's antagonist, wants to destroy the caterpillar. What follows is 7 minutes of Maggie executing a multi-stage protective operation that involves reading the environment, identifying threats, developing strategies in real time, adapting when those strategies fail, predicting the behavior of other individuals, and navigating the physical space of the facility in ways that her motor development should not permit. She falls down constantly. Her body cannot keep up with her mind. She crawls when she needs to run, stumbles when she needs to be precise, struggles with physical distances and heights that an adult would navigate without thought. And yet she succeeds. Every decision she makes is the correct one. Every adaptation she produces in response to a changing situation is optimal. She makes no cognitive errors, only physical ones, and she compensates for the physical limitations through planning depth that allows her to account for them in advance. 7 minutes of a baby demonstrating what adult intelligence in an infant body looks like. No dialogue, no voiceover. Just Maggie moving through a problem with a clarity and efficiency that would be remarkable in someone 4 times her age. The Academy saw it. They nominated it. The nomination was not for animation craft alone. It was for storytelling, for the specific achievement of conveying a rich inner life through the behavior of a character who cannot speak. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly in various episodes. The results, when played seriously rather than as a quick gag, suggest cognitive abilities that fall well outside normal infant ranges. In one episode, her scores on developmental assessments are so high that the measuring instruments cannot accurately characterize them. The show treats this as a joke and moves on, but the pattern is consistent. Maggie tests above any ceiling the tests can establish. And yet she does not speak. Her first word was daddy, voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in a single cameo appearance in a Season 4 episode. The word was uttered once. It has not been followed by a second word in any episode since. 36 years of life, of observation, of whatever is happening inside that mind, and publicly, to the family and the community and the audience, Maggie remains at the vocabulary level of a newborn. The theory here is not that Maggie cannot speak. It is that she has decided not to. And the more you look at Springfield through Maggie's particular vantage point, the more that decision makes sense. Look at what happens to the intelligent women in this family. We already spent time with Mona Simpson, who used her intelligence to act against an injustice and spent the rest of her life as a fugitive. And then there is Lisa. Lisa Simpson is, by the show's own repeated acknowledgement, a genius. Her intelligence is not a background trait. It is her defining characteristic, the thing the show returns to constantly across every season, the quality that shapes every relationship she has and every experience she goes through. Lisa is brilliant, and she leads with it. She announces herself as the smartest person in the room. She challenges the conclusions that others have reached. She advocates for positions that the community finds uncomfortable. She asks the questions Springfield has agreed not to ask. And the community's response to Lisa is, consistently, to dismiss her, to tolerate her, to occasionally admire her abstractly while refusing to act on anything she tells them, to use her as a symbol of precociousness while ignoring the actual content of what she says. Lisa is the most visibly intelligent person in her household, and her intelligence changes almost nothing about the world immediately around her. She is 8 years old, and she has already learned that being right in Springfield is not the same as being heard. Maggie has watched this. Maggie has watched her older sister fight that battle every day for years and come away from each engagement with the same result. Recognition without consequence. Admiration without change. The smartest person in the room, perpetually talking to a room that has decided not to listen. And Maggie, apparently, drew a conclusion. If intelligence deployed visibly produces isolation and resistance, then intelligence deployed invisibly produces freedom. The less the environment can see of what you know and what you are capable of, the less it can manage you, the less it can dismiss you, the less it can perform its routine of tolerating you while ignoring you. Maggie does not speak because speaking would reveal the extent of what she understands, and revealing that would make her Lisa. It would make her a category the town already knows how to handle, the brilliant child who is heard and then not heard, the prodigy who is admired and then managed back into irrelevance. By staying quiet, Maggie remains unclassifiable. Unsettling in a specific way, you do not know what she knows. You do not know how much she has understood of every conversation that has happened in her presence. You do not know what 36 years of silent observation have accumulated in whatever cognitive structure she has built behind those enormous eyes. The baby is watching. The baby is always watching, and the baby has decided that the right response to what she sees is silence. There is something deeply practical about this. Maggie's invisibility has strategic value that Lisa's visibility does not. When Burns was shot, the investigation focused everywhere except the baby. Because who suspects the baby? Who monitors the infant? Who considers the 1-year-old a threat or a variable in any meaningful calculation? Maggie's developmental presentation as an ordinary baby is the most effective disguise available in Springfield, and the show gives you repeated evidence that she is maintaining it deliberately rather than wearing it passively. The scene after the Burns shooting. Everyone leaves the room. Maggie checks her surroundings. When she is certain she is alone, she makes the gesture. The deliberate checking, the waiting for privacy, the precision of the moment, this is not reflexive infant behavior. This is considered behavior. This is a 1-year-old understanding that an action has significance and that performing it in front of others would have consequences. Situational awareness. Caution. Impulse control. These are not traits the developmental literature associates with children under 18 months. These are traits associated with minds that can model other minds, that can understand how their own actions will be perceived and calibrated accordingly. Whatever is happening inside Maggie Simpson's head, it is operating at a level that has no appropriate developmental framework for a child her age. And she is apparently fully aware of how inappropriate that level is in the context she inhabits. Now connect this to the environmental contamination theory we explored earlier. If the radiation from the nuclear power plant has produced mutations in Springfield's residents that express differently across different individuals, then Maggie and Homer represent the opposite poles of that spectrum. Homer's cognitive function was reduced by his environment. Maggie's was amplified. Same family, same contaminated household, same yellow skin, same 4 fingers. But where the father's exposure produced a man who cannot reliably remember why he went to the kitchen, the youngest child's exposure produced something the measuring instruments cannot adequately characterize. The radiation theory does not require that mutations be uniform. Biology does not work that way. The same environmental exposure in different genetic systems produces different outcomes. Some exposure reduces. Some exposure enhances. The variability is the thing, And in a town where the contamination has been ongoing for decades, affecting generations of residents and their offspring, you would expect a range of outcomes as wide as the range of individuals experiencing the exposure. Homer is one end, Maggie is the other, and in between them is every shade of Springfield's altered population, each person carrying their particular version of what the power plant's runoff has done to them, most of them never knowing enough to make the connection. There is one more dimension to Maggie that deserves attention before we move on, and it is the most tender reading of all the theories we explore tonight. If the Homer coma theory is true, if every episode since April 1993 is a dream being generated by an unconscious man in a hospital bed, then Maggie is not a character with an independent existence. She is a projection. She is Homer's idea of his youngest daughter, held in the amber of his last memory of her, 1 year old and just learning to exist in the world. Homer cannot know who Maggie grows up to be. He cannot watch her develop. He cannot hear her speak or see her walk steadily or learn what kind of person she becomes. He is asleep, and the dream can only work from the material it has, which is the Maggie he knew before the vending machine fell. And so in the dream, Homer makes her extraordinary. He gives her an intelligence that transcends her developmental stage. He makes her capable of things no real baby could do. He protects her in the only way the dream allows, by making her powerful enough to protect herself. In this reading, Maggie's silence is not a strategy. It is Homer's longing. It is the wish of a father who cannot be there, rendered in the only form available to an unconscious mind, as a baby who will always be a baby, who will always be safe, who will always have the capacity to handle whatever comes. A father's prayer, expressed as a character trait. That interpretation might be the most heartbreaking thing in the entire show, and the show never says it explicitly because the show, if the coma theory is true, cannot say it explicitly. Homer's dream cannot acknowledge that it is a dream. The unconscious mind cannot wake itself up by confessing to what it is. So Maggie stays 1 year old, stays quiet, stays mysterious, stays in every version of the story, the character whose full potential we can sense but never fully see. And maybe that is true for all of us, in the people we love when we are not there to watch them grow. We freeze them at the last age we saw them. We preserve them in whatever form our memory holds. Maggie is frozen at 1 year old, because that is how old she was the last time Homer saw her. And in the dream, she is extraordinary. She always was. Section 7. Mr. Burns and the Art of Not Dying. How the oldest man in Springfield keeps defying mortality. Charles Montgomery Burns should not be alive. This is not a general observation about the difficulty of reaching extreme old age. This is a specific statement about a specific man whose age, across various episodes and across the show's entire run, has been placed somewhere between 100 and 140 years. Burns has referenced personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century. He has described working relationships with historical figures who were dead before most of the show's audience was born. He knew Howard Hughes, he attended Yale, he served in World War II, albeit in a role that the show characterizes as morally ambiguous at best. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during the war and kept it hidden for decades. He has told stories about the Gilded Age as a first-person experience. He refers to the Spanish-American War as something that happened to him rather than something he has read about. His family wealth predates the Industrial Revolution, and the Burns dynasty, by the show's account, stretches back centuries, not decades, centuries. And yet there he is, every episode, in his enormous office behind his enormous desk, thin as parchment paper, with the physical strength of a very old cat and the mind of a chess grandmaster in the middle of the best game of his career. The show addresses his survival directly in the episode called The Springfield Files, which is the X-Files parody in which Homer sees what he believes is an alien in the woods near Springfield. The investigation that follows is a comedy, but the reveal at the end is not entirely played for laughs. The alien Homer has been seeing in the forest is not an alien, it is Mr. Burns. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so loaded with radiation therapy and chemical intervention, that it causes his entire body to emit a visible green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for precisely 7 more days. Without it, he dies. The margin for error is 0. Burns does not live the way other people live, through the ordinary processes of cellular biology and metabolic function. He is kept alive through scheduled maintenance, the way you maintain a machine. Every week, the machine gets serviced. Every week, it gets 7 more days of operation. And the treatment's effects are so extreme that after each session, Burns wanders out of the facility in a dazed, euphoric state, glowing visibly in the dark, stumbling through the woods in a way that to an untrained observer looks exactly like an alien moving through a forest. Burns is not surviving naturally, he is surviving artificially, through a medical protocol that has to be administered with clockwork precision because any interruption would be fatal. Now, there is an episode that exists alongside this one in the show's continuity, and its implications are rarely fully discussed. In an episode about Burns's medical condition, a doctor informs him that he has every disease known to medical science, every single one, simultaneously present in his body. Influenza, smallpox, croup, Lyme disease, lupus, everything the doctor can name is present, active, and competing for resources inside Burns's biological system. But here is the remarkable thing. Because all of these diseases are present simultaneously, they exist in a state of what the doctor calls perfect equilibrium. They are all trying to kill Burns at the same time, and because they are all present at once, they create a kind of gridlock. None of them can gain enough biological momentum to become dominant, because all the others are competing for the same space. They block each other. They cancel each other out. The doctor's conclusion is that Burns is technically the sickest man in the United States, but functionally indestructible, because everything that should kill him is being prevented from doing so by everything else that should also kill him. The show plays this for comedy. It is one of the most quoted scenes in the series. Three Stooges syndrome, the doctor calls it, comparing it to 3 large men trying to squeeze through a narrow doorway at exactly the same time. But if you accept the radiation theory, if you accept the premise that Burns's weekly treatments are doing something very specific and very deliberate to his biological systems, the comedy has a technical underpinning that is genuinely strange. Burns's weekly radiation treatments are not curing his diseases. They are managing them. They are keeping every illness in his body in a state of precise metabolic stasis, balanced against every other illness, preventing any single condition from gaining the biological momentum that would allow it to become the terminal event. The treatments are the equivalent of control rods in a nuclear reactor, the mechanisms that prevent a cascade from becoming a meltdown. Burns's body is a reactor. The treatments are the maintenance protocol that keeps the reaction contained. Without Smithers, this maintenance protocol would fail. Smithers manages Burns's schedule with a precision that goes beyond devotion and into something closer to medical oversight. He knows the treatment schedule. He ensures Burns arrives for every appointment. He monitors Burns's physical condition with a vigilance that the show depicts as bordering on obsessive. And the show has established, multiple times and in multiple ways, that if Smithers were ever removed from his position, Burns would be helpless within days. Not emotionally helpless, though that too, physically helpless. The disease equilibrium that keeps Burns alive depends on the treatment schedule. The treatment schedule depends on Smithers. Smithers is not just an assistant. He is a critical component of the biological infrastructure that keeps Burns operational. And Smithers knows this. He has to know this. He has managed Burns's medical protocol closely enough and long enough that he understands exactly what would happen if a treatment were missed. He is devoted to Burns for reasons that are complex and not reducible to simple loyalty. Part of that devotion is the knowledge that his absence is a death sentence. Now, the historical dimension of Burns's survival adds another layer to the impossibility of his age. Burns has referenced personal involvement in an enormous range of historical events. He served in World War II. He knew Howard Hughes during Hughes's active years. He was present at, or had first-hand awareness of, events that occurred at the turn of the 20th century. By the most conservative possible reading of his timeline, he was born in the 1880s and is currently in his late 142nd. By a less conservative reading, he could be older. If the weekly treatments began when Burns first showed signs of extreme age, when his natural biological processes began to fail and the intervention became necessary, then there was a period before those treatments when Burns was surviving through other means. The show hints at this through the family history. The Burns dynasty is described as one of the oldest and most continuously powerful in American history. Not just wealthy, continuously wealthy, and continuously powerful across generations that span centuries. Continuous power over centuries does not happen through normal generational succession. It requires either extraordinary luck or deliberate strategies for extending individual lifespans or maintaining institutional control across what should be the natural interruptions of human mortality. The show does not specify what those earlier strategies were. Pre-nuclear Burns, pre-radiation therapy Burns, the version of Charles Montgomery Burns who was born in an era before any of the technology that currently keeps him alive existed. How did he survive to an age where he could access that technology? The question is never answered. The show raises it implicitly through the family history and then leaves it as an open resonance in the background of everything we know about Burns. What is answered, or at least what is strongly implied, is the relationship between Burns's longevity and his power. Every institution Burns has built, every politician he has bought, every doctor he has retained, every medical protocol he has funded, serves a single ultimate purpose: keep Burns alive. Keep the treatments coming. Maintain the disease equilibrium. Keep the reactor running. Burns's entire empire, the power plant, the municipal influence, the political reach, the private physicians, the pharmaceutical division that the show mentions in one episode and never returns to, all of it exists in service of one man's refusal to die. The wealth funds the survival. The survival maintains the wealth. It is a closed loop, self-sustaining, designed to continue indefinitely regardless of what happens to the world around it. And Springfield needs this loop to continue. The town's economy depends on the power plant. The power plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on the treatments. The treatments depend on the infrastructure that Burns's wealth provides. If Burns dies, the loop breaks, and Springfield has no economic alternative. The town is trapped in its dependence on the man who is poisoning it. Springfield cannot kill Burns because Springfield cannot survive without Burns. And Burns cannot die because dying would mean the system he built would finally have to answer for what it has done. That is not immortality. It is something more specific and in some ways more troubling. It is the logical endpoint of a system that has been designed with the survival of its principal architect as its primary operational objective, at the expense of every other consideration, including the health and welfare of every person who lives within the system's reach. Burns is too expensive to die, and Springfield will keep paying the bill. There is one more angle on Burns's survival that deserves attention before we move on. The show has repeatedly depicted Burns as someone who has come close to death and always been pulled back by the machinery of his wealth. He has been shot. He has been hospitalized. He has collapsed, fallen, been attacked, been poisoned, been left in the wilderness, and every time, he comes back. The mechanics of his return are always the same: money, infrastructure, someone standing by with the resources to respond. Burns does not survive the way Homer survives, through the show's comic logic of physical resilience. Burns survives through institutional preparedness. The system built around his survival has a response for every possible threat because Burns has spent a century identifying threats and building responses to them. Homer survives because the show needs him to. Burns survives because he has engineered his survival so thoroughly that external need is almost irrelevant. Homer's immortality is passive. Burns's immortality is architecture. And the architecture is humming along perfectly. Weekly treatments arriving on schedule, Smithers at his post, the power plant generating electricity for a town that cannot question the source, and Burns behind his desk with the green glow of his treatments barely faded, looking out his window at a Springfield that exists to sustain him, whether it knows it or not. It usually does not know. That is how he prefers it. Section 8. The Principal Who Wasn't. Armin Tamzarian and the Day Springfield Voted to Make Truth Illegal. Season 9, Episode 2. The 28th of September 1997. The episode was called The Principal and the Pauper, and it detonated in the show's fan community with an intensity that has not fully subsided 28 years later. It is consistently ranked among the most controversial episodes the show has ever produced. It inspired a level of backlash that caused one of the show's own voice actors to publicly express displeasure. Critics cited it as the moment the show stopped caring about its own continuity. And everything the fans said about it is true. The episode did something radical to a character the audience had spent 8 seasons understanding. It revealed that everything they thought they knew about Principal Seymour Skinner was built on a fiction. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds a ceremony honoring Principal Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. It is a warm, celebratory event. The community is gathered, the mood is appreciative, and then a stranger walks in. He identifies himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war in Southeast Asia and presumed dead. He survived. He escaped. He came home. And he came to Springfield to find that someone else had been living his life for 2 decades. The man Springfield has known as Seymour Skinner is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a street punk with no fixed address and no prospects. He was drafted. He served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and believed killed, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news to Skinner's mother, Agnes. But when he arrived, Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone in his life, who had never had a family or a home or a name worth keeping, let the assumption stand. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the history, the mother, and the life, and he lived inside that stolen identity for 20 years without discovery, until the real Skinner walked through the gymnasium door. The revelation is total. The evidence is undeniable. Every person in Springfield is present when it happens. The truth is fully exposed, publicly, in front of the entire community. There is no ambiguity, no possibility of error. Everyone knows. And here is the extraordinary thing that happens next. The town holds a meeting. The real Seymour Skinner is present. Armin Tamzarian is present. The situation is fully understood by everyone in attendance. And the town does not discuss what legal action should be taken. It does not discuss how to restore the real Skinner's identity. It does not discuss accountability or justice, or what 2 decades of identity fraud means for every student who passed through Tamzarian's school under the belief that they were being educated by a real principal with real credentials. The town votes on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. And the verdict is unanimous. They vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree. The imposter is henceforth, legally and officially, the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the man who was a prisoner of war, who survived capture and hardship and a long journey home, who arrived in Springfield with every right to his own identity and found someone else occupying it, is tied to a railroad car and physically removed from town. And the judge's decree makes it explicitly illegal, under penalty of torture, to ever mention the true version of events again. Let that settle, because it is worth really sitting with. A community, in full possession of the truth, with the actual person whose life had been stolen standing directly in front of them, voted to expel the truth and exile the person who represented it. They chose the comfortable fiction over the uncomfortable reality, and made that choice legally binding. Fans hated this episode for what it did to Skinner's character. And the criticism is fair. The episode retroactively made everything about Skinner, his military service, his relationship with Agnes, his dynamic with Bart, his personality, his entire presence in the show, a lie. The character the audience had spent 8 seasons with did not really exist. What existed was a performance, a stolen life worn by someone else, maintained through collective ignorance. But here is what the criticism of the episode tends to miss. The episode is not doing anything new. It is making explicit what has always been happening in Springfield. Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen the comfortable version of events over the true one. The town has always agreed, at some collective and largely unconscious level, to not notice the things that would require uncomfortable action. The three-eyed fish, the contaminated water, the safety violations, the glowing billionaire, the shooting that was never properly solved, the conspiracy that drove Mona Simpson underground. All of these are things that Springfield has seen and chosen not to see. The Principal and the Pauper is simply the episode where Springfield does this in public, in real time, and with a formal vote and a judicial decree. It makes visible the mechanism that the show has been operating through since its first season. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe or ignores a contradiction or resets to normal after something world-altering, it happens off-screen, between episodes, in the implied space where the show's continuity does not follow. You end the episode and start the next one, and the destruction of the previous episode has simply ceased to have happened. This episode shows you how that works. It shows you the vote, it shows you the legal machinery, it shows you the physical act of expulsion. A man tied to a train and removed from the community so that the truth he represents cannot persist in the space the community inhabits. That is not a comic book reset. That is a social mechanism with a name. Denial, institutionalized, formalized, made binding by authority and consent. Small communities have historically demonstrated a remarkable capacity for this kind of collective denial. Scandals get buried, crimes get forgotten, inconvenient facts get revised into something more comfortable. The official version becomes the only version not through truth but through repetition, through social pressure, through the gradual erosion of any competing account until the lie and the record are indistinguishable. Springfield does not forget because its residents are stupid, though the radiation theory suggests that cognitive impairment is a contributing factor. Springfield forgets because remembering is too costly. If you remember that the fish has 3 eyes, you have to think about what is in the water. If you think about what is in the water, you have to confront the power plant. If you confront the power plant, you have to confront Burns. If you confront Burns, the economy collapses. If the economy collapses, the town dies. So you do not remember the fish. You vote not to remember. You make it illegal to remember. You tie the memory to a train and watch it roll away. The Principal and the Pauper is the episode where the show drew the entire mechanism in one clear image and showed it to you. And the fan response was to be angry at the show for breaking its own continuity, rather than to recognize the continuity break as the point. The episode is not a failure of the show's internal logic. It is the show's internal logic made transparent. Armin Tamzarian is still Principal Skinner. Springfield is still pretending that works. The real Seymour Skinner is somewhere beyond the city limits, carried away on a railroad car, the last honest man in a town that made honesty a crime. He tried to come home. The town sent him away. That is Springfield. That has always been Springfield. The episode just said it out loud. There is a secondary reading of this episode that connects to the Homer coma theory, and it is worth mentioning before we move on. If everything since April 1993 is Homer's dream, if the entire middle and later run of the show is an unconscious man's mind telling itself stories, then this episode takes on a particular psychological dimension. Homer's dreaming mind invented a scenario in which an entire town voted to sustain a lie, in which a stolen identity became legally real, in which the fake version of a life replaced the true one through collective agreement and institutional force. Why would Homer dream this? Because it rhymes with what Homer needs to believe. He needs to believe that a fabricated life can become real through consensus. He needs to believe that absence can be filled by invention. He needs to believe that the dream he is living, the Springfield where Marge still loves him and the kids are still young and everything resets every week, can persist indefinitely as long as nobody questions it. The dream town of Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction because Homer needs the fiction maintained. Because if the truth is acknowledged, if someone stands up in the middle of the town meeting and says this is not real, the dream ends. Homer wakes up. And waking up is the one thing the dream cannot allow. Tamzarian's Springfield is Homer's coma, both held together by a unanimous vote not to look too closely at what is underneath. Section 9. Ned Flanders and the cage they built around him. The saddest story in Springfield. On paper, Ned Flanders has the best life in Springfield. He is kind. He is generous. He is in excellent physical condition. He is financially responsible. He owns his own business. He is a devoted father. He is a devout man of faith. He is genuinely pleasant to be around, in a way that is almost universally acknowledged by the other characters, even the ones who find his cheerfulness irritating. By any objective standard of measurement available in the Springfield universe, Ned is doing better than everyone else on Evergreen Terrace. And the show punishes him for it with a sustained and systematic cruelty that becomes more visible the longer you watch. Ned's wife, Maude, was killed at a NASCAR event when Homer, trying to dodge t-shirts being fired from a promotional cannon in the stands, caused the shirts to hit Maude instead. She fell from the bleachers. She died because Homer's reflexive self-preservation caused a woman to be struck by a projectile that would otherwise have missed her. Homer killed Ned's wife. Through selfishness and inattention rather than malice, but through his actions nonetheless. Ned forgave him. The forgiveness is what the show is after. Not the death, not the grieving, not the widowhood and the years of single fatherhood that followed, but the forgiveness. Ned's response to Homer being indirectly responsible for the death of his wife was to forgive, to continue the relationship, to move forward with the fundamental assumption that people should be treated with grace regardless of what they have done. For most of the show's run, this is depicted as Ned's defining virtue, His faith is genuine. His kindness is genuine. His capacity for forgiveness is genuine. But there is an episode that reframes all of it. A hurricane hits Springfield. The show uses hurricanes the way it uses every natural disaster, as an opportunity for community display and character revelation. The hurricane destroys Ned's house while leaving the Simpsons' house next door largely unscathed. The community, led by Homer, rallies to rebuild Ned's home. They work enthusiastically, donating materials and labor, creating something that looks from the outside like a heartwarming demonstration of community solidarity. The rebuilt house collapses immediately. It was built by people who meant well and had no idea what they were doing, assembled from donated materials of wildly varying quality without proper planning or structural oversight. The house that was supposed to represent community support is a literal disaster. And Ned, who has been patient and grateful and quietly devastated by everything that has happened, finally breaks. He snaps. He screams at the town. He insults every person who has ever wronged him or disappointed him or offered him well-meaning inadequacy in place of actual help. He says things he has been storing for years, decades, his entire adult life. He empties himself of everything he has been carrying in silence. And then he is institutionalized. The Springfield mental health facility eventually reveals what is at the bottom of Ned's breakdown. His childhood is the key. Ned was not always kind. Ned was not always patient. As a child, he was aggressive and uncontrollable, described by the show as feral. His parents, beatniks who philosophically opposed discipline, took him to a psychiatrist named Dr. Foster. Dr. Foster spent years conditioning Ned, using behavioral modification techniques intensive enough that the show describes the process as something close to psychological surgery. The kindness was programmed in. The patience was installed. The capacity to forgive was constructed in a laboratory of behavioral psychology by a man who spent years of Ned's childhood replacing his natural responses with manufactured ones. Ned's goodness is not a character trait he developed. It is a cage built around the person he actually is. And this changes everything about how you watch him in every episode that came before this revelation. The patience with Homer is not saintly. It is pathological. He is not choosing grace in those moments. His brain was wired to suppress the responses that would be natural given what Homer does to his life. The forgiveness after Maude's death is not a demonstration of spiritual depth. It is a programmed output from a behavioral system that cannot access the anger because the anger was conditioned away before Ned was old enough to decide whether he wanted it. The faith, which the show treats as Ned's most authentic quality, as the bedrock of who he is complicated by this too. When you consider that Ned's psychological structure was built through external intervention rather than organic development, you have to ask which parts of the resulting person are genuinely Ned and which parts are the intervention. His love for his sons seems real. His community engagement seems real. But the framework of faith that holds it all together, the theological structure that allows him to interpret his suffering as meaningful and his forgiveness as virtuous rather than compelled, could be read as part of the same behavioral architecture that was installed in childhood. Ned needs his faith to make sense of a life in which he does everything right and gets very little in return for it. The faith provides the explanatory structure. Without it, the pattern of Ned's experience is simply unjust. With it, there is a plan, there is meaning, there is a reason why the good man suffers and the comfortable man prospers, and the hurricane hits the right house and not the wrong one. And here is the thing about God in Springfield that is perhaps the darkest joke the show has ever told. God exists in Springfield. This is not a metaphor or an implication. God has appeared in the show. God has spoken with Homer. Homer has met God, face to face, more than once, and they have had conversations. God has given Homer specific guidance. God told Homer in the Homer the Heretic episode that his time was coming. God was a presence in Homer's life, a direct, accessible, conversational presence. Ned Flanders has dedicated his entire life to faith. He is at church every Sunday. He reads scripture. He structures his existence around his relationship with the divine. His faith is the most visible, most consistent, most practiced in all of Springfield. God has never spoken to Ned. The man who drinks too much and falls asleep in church and eats donuts during meltdown warnings and once fed his children pork rinds at midnight gets direct divine communication. The man who has devoted his life to the careful, sincere practice of his faith gets silence. That is not random. That is a thesis statement. The show is telling you, through the shape of what it depicts, that the systems in Springfield, including the cosmic ones, do not reward virtue. They reward something else. Compliance? Maybe? Amusement value? Narrative utility. Homer is more useful to the story than Ned. Homer's chaos generates more narrative energy than Ned's goodness, and so Homer gets the divine conversations and Ned gets the silence. The devout man listening at the door gets no answer. The man who does not even know the door exists gets visitors. What is the lesson? There is not a comfortable one. Ned Flanders is what happens when you do everything right in a system that is not optimized for rightness. When you build a good life in a town built on contamination, when you practice faith in a universe that reserves its attention for the chaotic and the lucky, his reward is a dead wife, a collapsed house, a neighbor who will never fully appreciate what he has lost on that neighbor's behalf, and a God who is literally present in the same town and has never once dropped by. Homer lives next door to Ned. They have lived next to each other for 36 years. The gap between their lives has never closed. Not because Homer works harder than Ned, not because Homer is a better person than Ned, because the system they both inhabit does not work the way Ned's faith says it should. The system works the way Springfield works, which is to say it sustains what already exists, it keeps the plant running and the boss living and the fog comfortable, and it does not particularly concern itself with whether the people inside it are good or bad, or trying or giving up. Ned is trying. Ned has always been trying, and Springfield, in its gentle and complete indifference, has simply never noticed. There is something in Ned's story that connects to the Mona Simpson story from a different angle. Both Mona and Ned attempted to engage with their world through moral seriousness. Mona saw a wrong and tried to right it, directly, physically, at personal cost. Ned sees suffering and tries to respond to it with grace, consistently, over decades, at enormous personal cost. Both were punished for their seriousness. Mona was exiled. Ned is quietly destroyed, episode by episode, by a town that admires his character and never stops causing him harm. The people who take Springfield seriously are the people Springfield treats worst. The people who navigate Springfield best are the ones who have learned, through instinct or experience, or a crayon in their brain, not to take it too seriously, not to expect it to be fair, not to need it to make sense. Homer, for all his flaws and limitations, has mastered that navigation. He does not expect fairness. He does not require consistency. He takes the beer when it is there and does not mourn it when it is gone, and finds something else to focus on in the very large and comfortable fog of a life lived below the threshold of critical awareness. Ned will never have that. His brain will not let him. The conditioning removed his capacity for the kind of comfortable detachment that would make Springfield livable. He is too attentive, too responsive, too present to the world around him to find the fog that Homer navigates by instinct. And so Ned suffers precisely because he is good, not as a moral lesson, not as cosmic reward deferred, just as the natural consequence of being a particular kind of person in a particular kind of place. Springfield is not a place that rewards goodness. Ned is a person who cannot stop being good. The intersection of those two facts is where his story lives. Section 10. The Floating Timeline. Why nobody ages, and what that means for everyone inside the loop. We have arrived at the final piece, the one that ties everything together. Bart Simpson was 10 years old in December 1989 when the show premiered. He is 10 years old now. He was 10 years old through the Clinton administration and the first Iraq War, and the birth of the Internet and September 11th, and the 2008 financial crisis, and a global pandemic, and everything else that happened across 3.5 decades of the world changing itself. He is 10 years old. He will be 10 years old next year. Lisa was 8 then, 8 now. Maggie was 1. Still 1. Homer and Marge were in their mid-30s. Still there. 36 years of real time, 0 years in Springfield. The industry term is a floating timeline. The show's present is always the viewer's present. Technology updates, cultural references change. The background of Springfield responds to the decade in which each episode is produced. But the characters do not age. They exist in a permanent present tense that moves through time without being affected by it, the way a buoy moves through water without traveling anywhere. This is standard practice for long-running animated shows. Most productions use some version of this approach because the alternative, aging characters in real time, would end the show within a decade at most. The floating timeline is not unique to The Simpsons. What is unique is that The Simpsons has been doing it long enough that the contradictions it creates have become enormous. When the show began, Homer and Marge's backstory was anchored to the late 1970s, high school sweethearts in an era of Watergate and disco. The flashback episodes of the early seasons have a specific texture, specific music, specific cultural references that belong to that decade. Their story was a 1970s story. But if Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they did not grow up in the 1970s. They grew up in the 2000s. A mid-30-year-old in 2025 would have been a teenager during the early Obama years. Their high school experience would have involved smartphones and social media and streaming video, and a cultural landscape that barely resembles the one the early flashback episodes depicted. The show has addressed this by returning to Homer and Marge's origin story multiple times, each retelling moving their formative years forward to match wherever the current timeline places them. They have been depicted as grunge kids of the 1990s, as ironic hipster types of the 2000s, as something vaguely millennial in more recent seasons. The love story stays the same. The couple stays the same. But the decade of their youth keeps sliding forward to maintain the arithmetic of the floating timeline. Homer and Marge do not have a stable past. They have a series of drafts, each one revised to suit the current present. Their memory is not a fixed record but a living document that keeps updating without their knowledge or consent. This is what the floating timeline does to characters across decades. It does not just freeze their ages. It destabilizes their histories. It makes their memories malleable. It converts their past from something that happened once, in a specific way, at a specific time, into something that keeps getting rewritten to stay consistent with a present that will not stay still. Now, every theory we have explored in this script has something to say about why nobody ages, and they converge in ways that are worth taking in slowly. The radiation theory says the contamination from the nuclear power plant has altered the cellular biology of Springfield's residents at a fundamental level. Altered cells age differently than unaltered ones. Some mutations suppress the aging process. Some mutations distort it. Whatever the specific mechanism, the theory holds that the residents of Springfield are not aging in the normal way because their biological systems have been so comprehensively altered by decades of exposure that normal biological processes no longer apply cleanly to them. Bart's cells are not normal cells. Lisa's cells are not normal cells. None of them are. And cells that have been fundamentally altered at the level that the radiation theory describes might simply not follow the standard aging trajectory. They might plateau. They might cycle. They might maintain a state of permanent developmental suspension that, from the outside, looks exactly like a child who has been 10 years old for 36 years. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist in the frozen dream of an unconscious man. Homer went into his coma in April 1993. With a specific image of his family. Bart was the age he was, Lisa was the age she was, Maggie was the age she was, and the dream can only reproduce what the dreamer knew. It cannot invent the future. It cannot age characters who were children at the moment of the dreaming, because the dreamer does not know what those children look like older. He was not there to see it. So they stay young, permanently, unchangingly young. Not because the dream chooses to freeze them, but because the dreamer has no material from which to construct an older version of them. The only Bart Homer knows is the 10-year-old Bart he had when the vending machine fell. And so that is the only Bart the dream can produce. The collective denial theory says the characters do not age because Springfield has voted, collectively and unconsciously, not to acknowledge the passage of time. Acknowledging that time has passed means acknowledging that things have changed. Acknowledging that things have changed means examining what has changed and what has remained the same and why. And that examination leads to the questions Springfield has spent 36 years not asking about the plant, about the contamination, about the deal Abe made, about who Skinner really is, about what is in the water. If time does not pass, those questions stay dormant. The children stay children. The parents stay in their 30s. The billionaire stays exactly as he has always been, ancient and glowing and present, and nobody has to sit down with the arithmetic of what that means. The Burns immortality theory says that at least one person in Springfield has found a way to extend life through technology and wealth, which means the concept of aging is already negotiable in this universe. If Burns can be kept alive at an age that should not be biologically possible through the application of sufficient resources and intelligence, then perhaps the town around him has been quietly subjected to a similar influence. Not the specific medical protocol that Burns receives, that is personal and expensive and requires Smithers's constant management, but something ambient, something in the water and the air and the food supply, something that the plant has been releasing for decades that does, among other things, alter the aging process of everyone exposed to it. The prediction theory connects the aging question to something outside the show's internal logic. The Simpsons has been depicting the same characters at the same ages for so long that they have become part of the cultural landscape in a very specific way. Bart at 10 is not just a fictional child. He is an icon. He is a t-shirt. He is a lunchbox. He is a meme structure and a cultural reference point that exists independent of any particular episode. The character has escaped the show and become a symbol. Symbols do not age. Symbols exist outside of time in a specific way. The Bart who was skateboarding in 1989 and the Bart who is skateboarding in a 2025 episode are the same Bart, not because of narrative logic, but because that is what the symbol requires. Aging Bart would be a different kind of project from making Bart, and the world's relationship to Bart, the cultural investment in that specific image of that specific character, makes aging him feel like a kind of violence against something people have integrated into their understanding of a particular period of their lives. This is the prediction theory's angle. The show does not just reflect culture. It has become part of culture in a way that makes it responsible for sustaining itself. And sustaining itself means keeping the characters unchanged, because the changed versions would not carry the same cultural weight as the originals. The Simpsons are frozen in time because we need them to be. That is the simplest and perhaps the truest version of the answer. All of the theories, the radiation, the coma, the denial, the immortality, the cultural influence, are different ways of articulating the same underlying fact. Springfield exists in a state of temporal suspension because the alternative is unacceptable. The alternative is the show ending. And the show ending means admitting that 36 years have passed. It means Bart is 46. It means Lisa is 44. It means Homer and Marge are in their 70s, and the couch on Evergreen Terrace is quieter than it used to be, and the kids come home for holidays when they can manage it, and the house has the specific quality of a space designed for a life it no longer fully holds. The show has imagined its characters aging. It has done this in specific episodes, carefully contained, clearly framed as hypothetical. The season 6 episode, Lisa's Wedding, shows Lisa as a 23-year-old woman, engaged to be married, living a life that feels continuous with the Lisa we know, and different from her in all the ways that time would make someone different. It is a beautiful episode. It is also the proof that the show can tell that story and then lock it away, seal it behind the label of hypothetical future, and return everything to normal. The glimpse through the window closes. The flash forward exists as a demonstration of what the show refuses to allow itself to become. And that refusal is not cowardice. It is not laziness. It is the show understanding that what it represents to its audience is more important than what it could accomplish narratively if it let its characters grow up. The Simpsons aged in real time would be a different show, probably a very good different show, but it would not be the thing that 36 years of television have built. It would not be the couch and the theme song and Bart still chalking words on the blackboard and Homer still tripping backward into the hedge. It would not be Springfield. And we need Springfield. We need it in the specific way you need a place that does not change. The way you need a town that will be exactly where you left it whenever you decide to return. The way you need to know that the family is still there, still fighting, still somehow making it work against all reasonable odds, still sitting down to dinner together, even if dinner is chaotic and the conversation goes sideways, and Homer says something that should not be said, and the kids roll their eyes and Marge sighs in that particular way. That means she is both exasperated and deeply in love with all of them. That dinner table, that specific, messy, resilient dinner table, we have been sitting down to it for 36 years and we are not ready to leave. The floating timeline is our refusal to leave. We pressed pause in 1989, and we keep holding the button down because playing would mean ending, and ending would mean admitting that the world outside Springfield has been moving forward the whole time we were watching, and we have not been paying enough attention to it. Springfield is our comfortable looking away, and every theory in this script, every mystery we have explored tonight, every buried truth and unresolved question and impossible survival and deliberate silence is the show's patient, gentle attempt to remind us that looking away has a cost, that the yellow skin means something, that the floating timeline is not free, that the fog Homer chose is not available to everyone and does not solve the underlying problem. But also, and this is what I want to leave you with as we come toward the end of tonight, the show keeps going because Homer keeps dreaming about the people he loves. Because the radiation, whatever else it has done to Springfield, has also created something like a miracle in at least two of the people it touched. A man who survives everything because his body refuses to give up, and a baby who understands everything because her mind refuses to stop. Because the mystery of who shot Burns is still open, and the mystery of where Springfield is still open, and the mystery of what Maggie is waiting to say is still open, and open mysteries are not failures. They are invitations. Because Ned Flanders goes to church every Sunday and believes something true and something important about the value of showing up, even when showing up gets you nothing except the knowledge that you showed up, and that knowledge is not nothing. Because Mona Simpson, in 1969, in a biological weapons laboratory in a cartoon town, made the decision that a housewife had as much right to resist as anyone, and she was right, and her granddaughter is carrying that same quality in silence, waiting for the right moment, which will come. Because Armin Tamzarian, the street kid from nowhere who borrowed someone else's life and built something real inside it, is still Principal Skinner, because the town chose him, because sometimes the person you decide to be is more real than the person you were born, and Springfield, for all its dysfunction, understood that on the day of the vote, because the mysteries do not need answers to be beautiful, they just need someone willing to keep asking. And we have been asking for 36 years. Let's not stop now. Thank you for spending this night in Springfield. The couch is always there, the family is always home, and the questions are always waiting, patient as Maggie, quiet as the space between Ned's prayers and whatever is on the other end of them. Drop a comment with where you are and what time it is. There is something I love about knowing that people all over the world are drifting to sleep to the same mysteries. And if you want more nights like this one, subscribing means the next one finds you. Take care of yourself, get some rest. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. Extended section, the predictions. How a cartoon. From 1989 keeps lining up with the future and what it actually means. There is a category of Simpsons conversation that has developed its own mythology in the years since the internet made sharing easy. The predictions. The idea, repeated in headlines and social media posts and YouTube videos with hundreds of millions of views combined, is that The Simpsons has been accurately forecasting world events for decades, that a writing room in Los Angeles has somehow produced, inside the scripts of an animated family comedy, a series of precise predictions about specific future events, that the show knows something it should not know. The list of supposed predictions has grown long enough to be its own document. The Trump presidency, depicted in a year 2000 episode in which a future President Lisa inherits a budget disaster from her predecessor, identified as Donald Trump. The Disney acquisition of 20th Century Fox, depicted in a 1998 episode as a joke about corporate consolidation. The Siegfried and Roy tiger attack, depicted in an episode where a white tiger turns on its performer. A 1993 episode depicting a flu pandemic originating from Asia, airing 27 years before COVID. 19. An equation in a 1998 episode that appears to approximate the mass of the Higgs boson particle, which would not be experimentally confirmed until 2012. A 1995 episode depicting a device worn on the wrist that functions like a modern smartwatch. The 2024 performance by Cypress Hill with the London Symphony Orchestra, depicted in a 1996 joke as an accidental booking. Every time a new one surfaces, the internet cycles through the same response: amazement, suspicion. The question asked every time: how are they doing this? The people who make the show have answered this question directly and clearly multiple times. Al Jean, who has been an executive producer since the early seasons, put it simply: if you throw enough darts, you're going to hit some bullseyes. Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its most critically acclaimed seasons, described it as mainly coincidence, because episodes are so old that history repeats itself. That is the official position from inside the show: volume, time, and the cyclical nature of human events. And it is, to a significant degree, correct. The Simpsons has produced approximately 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, observations, satirical references, and extrapolations from current trends. When you generate that much content about American culture, technology, politics, and society over that long a period, some percentage of what you produce will align with future events through sheer probability. The more content you generate, the more opportunities for coincidence exist. The more time passes, the more events occur that can be compared to what the show depicted. And if the show is doing its job well, if it is genuinely engaging with real trends and real trajectories rather than inventing scenarios from whole cloth, then some of what it depicts will turn out to be directionally accurate. Fact-checking organizations have examined the most viral claims and found, consistently, that many of them are simpler than they appear. The Trump episode was written by a team that was aware Trump had been publicly discussing the possibility of a presidential run since the late 1980s. They did not predict his presidency out of nothing. They observed that a man with Trump's particular combination of celebrity, wealth, and appetite for self-promotion was exactly the kind of person the current political environment might eventually install in the highest office, and they made a joke about the logical end of that trajectory. The joke was accurate not because it was prophetic, but because the trajectory was real, visible, and moving in a direction anyone paying close attention could have mapped. The Disney-Fox merger was not a prediction. It was an observation that media consolidation was an accelerating trend, and that the logical end of that trend was a small number of enormous entities owning everything. The show just depicted one specific version of that logical end earlier than it happened. The smartwatch joke was not a prediction of a specific product. It was an extrapolation from an observable trend, technology getting smaller, more personal, more wearable, toward an obvious destination. That destination arrived roughly on schedule. The writing staff of The Simpsons has historically been one of the most educated in television. Harvard graduates, people with backgrounds in mathematics, physics, economics, political theory, computer science, people who read widely, pay attention carefully, and spend their professional lives asking what the current trajectory of American culture implies about where that culture is heading. Their observations are not random. They are calibrated guesses made by smart people who understand both the patterns of history and the specific dynamics of the moment they are living in. They are not predicting the future. They are reading the present more carefully than most people do, and then extending what they read forward a few steps to wherever the line naturally goes. But here is where the clean debunking starts to get complicated. Some of the coincidences are specific in ways that the volume and probability explanation starts to strain to accommodate. The Trump episode did not just predict that a celebrity might run for president. It named Trump specifically. It depicted him in a context, the escalator descent that mirrors his 2015 campaign announcement, that was visually specific in a way that pure trend extrapolation does not fully account for. The Siegfried and Roy depiction was not just a generic joke about dangerous animals. It specified a white tiger attacking one of the performers, which matches what actually happened in 2003 with a level of specificity that makes coincidence feel like an inadequate explanation, even if it is ultimately the right one. These are not cases where the show depicted something thematically similar to a future event. These are cases where specific details align in ways that exceed what statistical probability would comfortably predict. And this is where the most interesting theory enters. The show does not predict the future. The show shapes the future. Not through magic, not through prophecy, through cultural influence of a kind and scale that very few pieces of media in history have achieved. The Simpsons has been embedded in American culture for 36 years. Its references are part of the American lexicon. Its observations are part of how Americans understand themselves and their institutions. Its satire has been absorbed by the culture it was satirizing and has, over time, changed the culture's relationship to its own absurdities. When The Simpsons made a joke about Trump becoming president in 2000, that joke entered the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people saw it. Millions of people shared it, quoted it, referenced it. It became part of the ambient cultural context in which Trump's actual political ambitions developed over the following 16 years. The joke made the idea of a Trump presidency feel familiar, feel like something that had already been processed and understood and filed under absurd but conceivable. It did not make the presidency happen, but it may have made it feel slightly more possible, slightly less shocking when it did. And when it happened, The collective response was less like encountering something unprecedented and more like recognizing something familiar. We have seen this before. The Simpsons already did this. The joke prepared the cultural imagination for the event. The event arrived in a context where the imagination had already made room for it. This is the most interesting version of the prediction phenomenon. The show is not a crystal ball. It is a mirror that the culture has been staring into for so long that the mirror and the culture have started to reflect each other. Springfield shapes America the way any long-running, deeply embedded cultural artifact shapes the society that produced it, by normalizing its satirical targets, by making the absurd feel familiar, by pre-processing the future in joke form before the future arrives in earnest. America has become Springfield. Not because Springfield predicted America, but because America spent 36 years watching itself depicted as Springfield and gradually incorporated that depiction into its self-understanding. The nuclear plant, the corrupt billionaire, the incompetent safety systems, the population too distracted to notice what is happening to them, the endless cycle of catastrophe and reset, the collective amnesia that allows the same mistakes to happen in consecutive generations. Springfield is not a prediction. It is a diagnosis. And America has been reading its own diagnosis for 36 years without fully acknowledging what it is a description of. And then there is the confirmation bias piece, which is unglamorous but important. The Simpsons has made thousands of predictions that did not come true. Jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies and technologies that never materialized. Jokes about political outcomes that went differently than depicted. Jokes about cultural shifts that simply did not happen. Nobody shares screenshots of those. Nobody posts articles about The Simpsons' failed predictions. The algorithm of social media attention is ruthlessly selective. Only the hits circulate. The misses dissolve. 800 episodes. Thousands of satirical observations. Filter those observations through the most powerful confirmation bias engine in history, which is the internet, where shared content is almost entirely hits by definition, and you end up with a highlight reel that looks like prophecy. It is not prophecy. It is the result of a very smart team writing a very long show that has been running long enough for some percentage of its output to align with future events, combined with a media environment that amplifies alignment and ignores everything else. But knowing that does not make it entirely ordinary, because even accounting for volume and confirmation bias, the specific nature of some of the alignments remains genuinely strange. And the meta-phenomenon of a show that has become embedded enough in American culture to shape the cultural context of the events it depicted as jokes is its own kind of remarkable. The Simpsons is not magic, but it is something that requires a category more specific than coincidence to fully describe. 800 episodes. 36 years, a writing staff that has been reading American culture with extraordinary care for a very long time, and enough bullseyes to make even the people who made them occasionally pause and wonder if maybe they know something they should not. Extended section. Hans Moleman. The body count the show has been quietly accumulating for 3 decades. If you watch The Simpsons long enough, you start to notice something. Hans Moleman keeps dying. He is a small man, very small. Old or appearing old, though the show has established at least once that he is 31 years old, which if true represents one of the most alarming aging processes in Springfield's already alarming demographic profile. He is nearly blind. He walks slowly, with the specific gait of someone whose body is not entirely convinced it wants to continue. He appears in the background of Springfield scenes, in crowds, in waiting rooms, in any location where a nearly invisible elderly man might plausibly exist without attracting attention. And then something falls on him, or hits him, or crushes him, or buries him, or burns him, or causes him to be consumed by an animal, or drops him from a significant height, or electrocutes him, or drowns him, or involves him in some other mechanism of fatal injury that the show depicts with varying degrees of directness before moving on to the next joke. Hans Moleman dies. By any reasonable estimate across the show's run, he has died dozens of times. In standard canonical episodes, not in Treehouse of Horror specials or dream sequences, but in the regular continuity of the show's world, Hans Moleman has died and returned to life without explanation more times than any other character in the history of American animation. The show treats this as ambient comedy. It is a running gag so low-key, so consistent, so embedded in the texture of how Springfield works that you can watch it happen without registering it as the extraordinary thing it is. A man dies. Next week he is back. Nobody mentions it. Nobody investigates. Nobody asks the obvious question about a Springfield resident who keeps being fatally injured and keeps showing up for more. The radiation theory, applied to mole men specifically, produces one of its more extreme implications. If chronic exposure to the nuclear plant's runoff has produced biological mutations in Springfield's residents, and if those mutations express differently in different individuals, then molemen may represent the absolute extreme of one specific mutation. Cellular regeneration. His body may have been altered at such a fundamental level that it cannot remain dead. It reconstitutes. It resets. It returns from states of fatal damage through a biological process that has no analog in normal human physiology. He does not survive his deaths the way Homer survives injuries. Homer is resilient. He absorbs damage and heals faster than normal. Moleman actually dies, and then he does not stay dead, which is a different kind of mutation entirely. Under this reading, Moleman is the most radically mutated individual in Springfield. The contamination that gave Blinky a third eye and gave Homer a superhuman healing rate has given Hans Moleman something that should not be possible in any biological system: genuine, reversible mortality. Death in Springfield, for at least one resident, is a temporary condition. The coma theory's reading of Moleman is more comic and more melancholy at the same time. If everything since 1993 is Homer's dream, then Moleman is a background character, a piece of ambient Springfield scenery that Homer's dreaming mind generates to populate the crowd scenes. His deaths are the dream losing interest in a minor element and allowing it to lapse. His returns are the dream realizing it needs him again and reconstituting him from whatever fragment of memory generated him the first time. Moleman is not a person in this reading. He is a dream component. He dies when the dream stops paying attention to him and comes back when the dream needs the space he occupies to not be empty. There is something quietly disturbing about that interpretation. The idea that in Homer's unconscious simulation, some residents are so peripheral to the dreamer's emotional world that they can be extinguished and regenerated without continuity, without memory, without any persistence across the cycles of the dream. Moleman is the most forgotten man in a town of people who have made forgetting into an art form. And then there is the matter of his age. 31 years old, he said. Once. In one episode. In the context of a joke. The show never confirmed it, and never denied it, but it put the number in his mouth and moved on. If Moleman is 31 and appears to be in his 80s or 90s, something altered his aging process dramatically and early. The contamination that the radiation theory describes as suppressing aging in the general Springfield population has done something opposite in Moleman, accelerating his apparent physical aging to a degree that compressed decades of visible decline into what should have been the first decade or two of his adult life. Same environmental cause, different biological direction. Mutated one way in most residents, mutated an entirely different way in this one. And then possibly mutated in yet a third way when it comes to the mortality itself. Or maybe the number was a joke and we should not take it too seriously. Maybe it was a throwaway line and the writers intended nothing by it beyond the laugh. But in a show that has been building consistent patterns for 36 years, throwaway lines have a way of turning out to be something else on closer examination. Hans Moleman dies. He comes back. The town does not notice. That is Springfield. That is what Springfield does. He will be back next week, blinking slowly behind his thick glasses, ready to be killed again. He always is. Extended section. The Homer coma. The theory that reframes everything. We have referenced the Homer coma theory throughout this script, but it deserves its own full examination before we bring everything together. The 1st of April, 1993. The 18th episode of the show's 4th season aired. It was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was an April Fool's premise. Bart played a series of pranks on Homer, each one escalating, until he took one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and placed it in an industrial paint shaker. Homer opened the can. The explosion was extreme enough to require hospitalization. While Homer was recovering in the hospital, he spotted a candy bar in a vending machine across the room. He got up to get it. The vending machine tipped over. It crushed him. He flatlined. He entered a coma. The episode ends with Homer waking up. Bart confesses tearfully at his bedside. Homer springs awake and begins strangling his son. The family laughs. Everything returns to normal. The show explicitly tells you that Homer woke up from the coma. But the episode also explicitly tells you, in its final moments, that Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5% gone, permanently destroyed. And Homer's response to this information is to laugh, while acknowledging that he does not understand why he is laughing. The theory proposed by a Reddit user posting under the name Hard Topic a Name is this: Homer never woke up from that coma. The apparent awakening is the dream beginning. Every episode since April 1993, every storyline, every character development, every cultural reference, every celebrity appearance, every increasingly surreal plot is a fabrication being generated by the unconscious mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield, General. The evidence that the theory marshals in its support is substantial enough that the show's producers responded to it on the record, which is itself a form of acknowledgement. Consider the shift in the show's character that happens around that period. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a grounded show. Not realistic in an absolute sense, it was always a cartoon. But it dealt with recognizable human situations. Homer trying to quit drinking, Marge considering infidelity, Lisa developing a crush on a substitute teacher, Bart facing the consequences of academic failure. The show's emotional register was suburban and domestic. Its conflicts were the conflicts of real families, shaped by financial pressure and marital tension and the specific difficulty of raising children well when you are not always sure you have what that requires. After the coma episode, the show becomes something different. The shift is not subtle. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante group. Homer joins a secret society. Homer meets God twice. The show moves from a family sitcom with satirical edges to a show where the main character has held hundreds of different jobs, traveled to dozens of countries, befriended a remarkable number of celebrities, and survived physical trauma that would kill a military unit. The escalation is so dramatic that fans have been debating the exact moment the show changed for 20 years. The coma theory offers a precise answer. The show did not change. Homer's brain changed. The dream started small and grounded, producing situations that resembled the life Homer knew because that was all the dreaming brain had to work with. And as the coma extended, as more time passed, the dream's fidelity to reality deteriorated. The scenarios became more elaborate, more impossible, more detached from the world that Homer's pre-coma brain could have generated. The later seasons are stranger not because the writers gave up, but because Homer's brain is running longer on diminishing cognitive resources, and the simulation is starting to lose resolution. The aging problem is where the coma theory does something elegant. Nobody ages because they are inside a dream that was frozen on the day of the accident. Homer's unconscious mind cannot age his children because he did not see them age. The last image of Bart his conscious mind captured was a 10-year-old boy. The last image of Lisa was an 8-year-old girl. The last image of Maggie was a 1-year-old baby, and the dream has no material from which to generate older versions of them. It can only reproduce what the dreamer last knew. This is what comas do. Not physiologically in the precise clinical sense, but experientially. They freeze the dreamer in the moment. The world the coma patient inhabits in their unconscious state is built from the world as it existed at the point of loss. Time passes outside. Inside the dream, time is suspended at the last frame of waking consciousness. Every episode since April 1993 is Homer's mind refusing to let the frame advance, refusing to let Bart turn 11, refusing to let Lisa outgrow her saxophone, refusing to let Maggie say her second word. Because advancing the frame means growing up. Growing up means leaving. And if they leave, if they age out of the version he is carrying in his dreaming brain, there is nothing left to hold on to. The celebrity appearances make sense. Homer's brain, in the hospital, is receiving ambient stimuli. Sounds from the television in his room, voices from conversations at his bedside, names from the radio. The dreaming brain hears these fragments and incorporates them into the simulation. Celebrities appear in Springfield not because Springfield has become inexplicably attractive to famous people, but because Homer is absorbing ambient cultural information and translating it into dream characters. Every guest star is a name Homer heard through the fog of unconsciousness, arriving in the dream as a full person because the dreaming brain cannot render partial presences. The show acknowledged this theory in its 34th season in an episode called Lisa the Boy Scout. The production deliberately leaked a fake deleted scene in which Homer wakes from a long coma and reveals that every surreal episode had been a dream. The show then framed it as a hoax, a scene planted by fictional hackers, not real, not canon, not the actual answer. But they made it. They animated it. They showed it to the audience and said it was not real, and the denial came wrapped inside the very scenario the theory describes. Al Jean, the show's long-running executive producer, addressed the theory directly in a 2015 interview and dismissed it. He said Homer is not in a coma. The theory is fan speculation. It is not the truth of the show. He did not explain why nobody ages. He did not explain the tonal shift after season 4. He did not explain why God told Homer his time was coming 6 months before the coma episode, or why the show has become progressively more detached from reality with each passing season in exactly the pattern you would expect from a deteriorating dream. He said it was not true. The interviewer moved on. The fans did not move on. Because the theory does something that no official explanation has ever done. It makes the show make sense. All of it. The aging freeze, the tonal shift, the celebrity flood, the reset button, the increasingly impossible plots, the way Homer always finds his way home by the end of every episode. Of course, Homer always finds his way home. His mind is dreaming about home. The dream cannot place him anywhere else for long. And here is the part that remains with you. If the coma theory is true, the entire 33-year run of the show since 1993 is a love letter. Homer's deepest wish, the thing his unconscious mind has been producing episode after episode across decades of hospitalization, is the simplest wish imaginable. He wants his family. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous boy. He wants Lisa to still be playing her saxophone in her room. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold. He wants Friday night at the Simpsons house to last forever. And in the dream, it does. The family is preserved exactly as it was the last time he was conscious with them. Young, present, alive with the particular vitality of people who have not yet had to grow up and move away and become the complicated adult versions of the children he loves. Homer's coma is not a nightmare. It is his only available heaven. A house on Evergreen Terrace where the kids are always young, where the beer is always cold, where nobody has to say goodbye because nobody ever leaves, where the credits roll at the end of every episode and everything resets, and the family is together again on Monday morning, still intact, still his. The theory does not ruin The Simpsons. It makes every episode an act of love. A man dreaming about his family because his family is the only thing worth dreaming about. And every time Homer survives something that should end the dream, every time the world resets, every time the credits roll and Springfield comes back to normal, it is not lazy writing. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, if the dream finally collapses, if the simulation runs out of the cognitive resources to sustain itself, then Homer wakes up. And waking up means finding out how much time has actually passed, how old his children really are, whether Marge waited, whether anyone is still at his bedside. Or worse, it means not waking up at all. The show will never confirm this. But it has never disproved it either. And after 36 seasons, the evidence is baked so thoroughly into the structure of what the show is and how it behaves that the absence of official confirmation feels less like a definitive answer and more like the show maintaining exactly the same comfortable ambiguity it maintains about Springfield's location, about who shot Burns, about what Maggie is thinking, about why nobody ages. Everything in Springfield exists in that ambiguity, held there by something that might be radiation, or might be a dream, or might be a vote, or might be the most sophisticated comedy writing in television history, operating at a level that looks like accident and is actually something closer to architecture. The answers are there if you look for them. They always have been. Springfield has been showing you the truth for 36 years. It just needs you to look at the right things. Closing. The questions that remain. There is a version of Springfield that exists only in the space between what the show tells you and what the show implies. A version where the yellow skin means something, where the coma is still ongoing, where Maggie knows more than she will ever say, where Burns has been running his particular system since before anyone alive in the town was born, and will be running it long after all of them are gone, where the geography is undefined because the town made itself undefinable, where Ned Flanders prays in a church that God occasionally visits through Homer Simpson. This version of Springfield is not more depressing than the official version. It is stranger and darker and more specific, but it is also more coherent. It connects the pieces in ways that feel earned rather than accidental. It makes Springfield a place with a logic, even if that logic is the logic of a system that operates at the expense of the people inside it. And it makes The Simpsons ultimately a story about a family that survives that system, not by fighting it. Homer cannot fight it. He cannot see it clearly enough. Not by transcending it. Marge cannot transcend it. She is too committed to holding it all together from inside. Not even by understanding it. Lisa comes closest to understanding, but understanding gets her ignored and isolated and returned to her room with her saxophone and her books. They survive it by being who they are with each other. By Homer coming home every evening to the same house on the same street and finding that the people he loves are there. By Marge making dinner in the knowledge that it will probably not be appreciated but making it anyway. By Bart making trouble and getting caught and being forgiven, and making more trouble and getting caught again in the endless cycle of a childhood that the show understands is not really about the trouble. By Lisa playing her saxophone in her room and knowing that somewhere downstairs, even if nobody is paying attention at this exact moment, the family is there. By Maggie watching all of it, understanding all of it, saying nothing, knowing that for now saying nothing is the right move, and waiting with a patience that 36 years of observation has taught her is the deepest form of power available in a world that cannot stop talking long enough to hear anything. They survive Springfield by surviving it together, with all the dysfunction and the noise and the catastrophes that reset and the things that should be addressed and are not, and the love that exists in the gaps between all of it, real and persistent and apparently unkillable. That is The Simpsons. That has always been The Simpsons. And on a quiet night when the questions are too interesting to set down entirely, but not urgent enough to keep you from sleep, that is enough. More than enough. Springfield is there when you need it. The couch is always open. And the family, improbably, impossibly, beautifully, is always home. Good night. End of script. Total estimated word count, 43,000 plus words. Written for 11 Labs voiceover generation, slow, warm narration pace recommended. Paragraph breaks indicate natural breath points. The tone should feel like a late-night conversation, not a lecture. Present tense throughout. No urgency, just presence. Extended deep dive. The nuclear plant as character. What 342 violations actually mean and why nobody fixed them. The Springfield nuclear power plant appears in the background of so many episodes that it has become part of the show's visual grammar. The way the couch and the kitchen and the school bus are part of its visual grammar. It is always there, visible from certain angles, dominating the skyline in the establishing shots, the cooling towers rising against whatever sky the episode requires. It is so consistently present that the eye begins to treat it as scenery rather than as a subject. But the plant is not scenery. The plant is the subject. The plant has always been the subject. Everything we have discussed tonight radiates outward from those cracked cooling towers the way the contamination radiates outward from whatever is leaking inside them. Let us spend some real time with what the show has told us about the plant itself, because the details accumulate into something more disturbing than any individual detail suggests on its own. The facility is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor. This is the kind of plant that generates electricity by using nuclear fission to heat water into steam, which drives turbines. The cooling towers are not optional components. They are how the system manages the heat generated by the fission process. When they crack, the integrity of the cooling system is compromised. When the cooling system is compromised, the reactor's ability to maintain safe operating temperatures is impaired. This is not a theoretical concern. It is the basic physics of how the facility works. Burns patched the cracked towers with chewing gum. This is a joke. It is also a specific, real, physical inadequacy in the infrastructure of a nuclear power plant, which the show puts on screen and then moves past without dwelling on its implications, because dwelling on the implications would turn the episode into something other than a comedy. The radioactive waste dumping is perhaps the most consequential of the documented violations, because it explains the blinky problem and by extension, the yellow skin problem at the level of mechanism rather than implication. Radioactive waste dumped into bodies of water does not stay in the water. It enters the food chain. Fish absorb it through their gills and metabolize it into their tissue. The fish with 3 eyes is not a metaphor. It is the downstream consequence of dumping radioactive material into the river that the fish live in. And people drink from that river. The show does not say this explicitly in the Blinky episode, but it establishes it as a geographic fact in many other contexts. The river is part of Springfield's waterscape. The water supply is not entirely separate from the river system. When waste enters the river, it enters, eventually, the water that people consume. The plutonium used as a paperweight is a different kind of violation, one about casual familiarity with dangerous materials rather than systematic disposal. Plutonium on a desk means plutonium is being handled, stored, and apparently treated as incidental in the plant's everyday operations. The people who work at the facility are in proximity to materials that require careful containment, and those materials are being treated as office supplies. The luminescent rats running through the plant's lower levels are perhaps the most visually striking of the documented violations, and also in some ways the most informative. Rats are in the building. The building contains radioactive materials. The rats are glowing. The rats are also presumably running through the facility's entire network of passages and ducts and spaces, spreading whatever they are carrying wherever they go. Animals in nuclear facilities are not a minor logistical inconvenience. They are a contamination vector. And then there are the human skeletons in the basement. The show mentions this once and moves on. Human skeletal remains in the basement of an operating nuclear power plant. The show does not explain who these people were, how they died, how long they have been there, whether they were employees or trespassers or something else entirely. It shows you the bones and proceeds to the next joke. Human skeletons in the basement of a nuclear power plant is not a minor detail. It is an extreme detail. It suggests either a catastrophic accident in the plant's history that was never reported, or something worse. And the fact that nobody in Springfield, including the safety inspector whose job specifically involves identifying such things, finds this remarkable is the clearest possible illustration of what the plant's operating culture has become. Homer is the safety inspector. The show's own creator has stated that Homer has an IQ of 55. The show has depicted Homer sleeping at his workstation during normal operating hours. It has shown him eating donuts during meltdown warnings, apparently not registering what the alarms mean. It has shown him, in the specific incident referenced in the introductory section of this script, throwing a donut into the reactor core to see if it would become larger. This action did, in fact, cause a nuclear incident, which the show depicts and then resolves in the space of a single episode without lasting consequence. Homer has been the safety inspector for the entirety of his adult life. He was hired into this position by Mr. Burns, who understood exactly what he was getting when he hired Homer, because Burns understands the plant and its operations at a level that nobody else in Springfield comes close to matching. Burns did not accidentally hire an incompetent safety inspector. Burns hired the specific person who would function as a safety inspector in name while ensuring in practice that no effective safety inspections occurred. The German investors who briefly owned the plant understood this within a very short time of acquiring it. They fired Homer within days of taking ownership because they were managing the plant with the goal of making it function properly rather than the goal of ensuring its violations continued. And then they assessed the cost of bringing the facility up to code. The number was catastrophically high, not because the violations were recent or minor, because they had been accumulating, unaddressed, for decades. 342 of them, each one representing a state of the facility that should not be permitted to persist, and each one having persisted because Burns ensured it did by ensuring that the person whose job was to find them could not find them. Burns bought the plant back when the investors' assessment nearly bankrupted them, rehired Homer, and the violations continued as before. This is not accidental. It cannot be accidental. The mechanism is too specific, too consistent, too thoroughly sustained over too long a period to be the result of oversight or negligence. Burns is intelligent. Burns is strategic. Burns understands his own facility at a level that nobody else in Springfield does. Burns has known what every one of those 342 violations means and what the consequences of them are. He let them continue because the consequences serve him. The contamination of Springfield's environment, the mutation of its residents, the cognitive impairment that makes the population unable to effectively organize against him or even consistently notice what he is doing, all of it traces back to this facility and these violations and this specific decision to prioritize the continuation of the violations over the health of the community. Every yellow face in Springfield, every wide-set eye, Every fish with 3 eyes and every dog with the same proportional anomalies as its owners, and every child who should be asking why their home looks different from the places outsiders come from, but never does. The nuclear plant is the cause. Not the only cause, not the only factor, not the complete explanation for everything strange about Springfield, but the central one, the one that everything else connects to, the one that has been standing behind every joke and every reset and every impossible survival and every episode of collective amnesia for 36 years. The show put it in every establishing shot. The cooling towers are always visible. We just stopped looking at them. Extended deep dive. The Smithers problem? What the most loyal character in Springfield is actually protecting. Waylon Smithers has been the subject of ongoing fan discussion for reasons that primarily have to do with the show's long-delayed and eventual confirmation of what his feelings for Burns involve. That conversation is real and it matters. But there is another dimension to Smithers that receives less attention, and that, when examined carefully, reveals something important about the power structure of Springfield, and about what loyalty of that particular kind actually costs. Smithers is the most competent person in the show. This sounds like a simple observation, but it is worth sitting with. In a show populated by characters who fail at their jobs and at their lives with a consistency that is part of the comedy, Smithers succeeds at everything he is given to do. He manages Burns' schedule with precision. He maintains the treatment protocol that keeps Burns alive. He navigates the complex political landscape of Burns' business and personal relationships with an effectiveness that nobody else in Springfield approaches. He is, in the most direct and operational sense, the reason the system works. Without Smithers, Burns dies within a week. This is not metaphor. The weekly treatment that maintains Burns' biological equilibrium must be administered on schedule without fail, and Smithers is the person who manages that schedule. He is not merely an assistant in the organizational sense. He is a critical operational component of Burns' survival infrastructure. His job description, if it were written honestly, would read something like, "Keep the owner alive." This gives Smithers a very specific kind of power that the show rarely examines directly. He cannot leave. Not because Burns has trapped him, not because there are formal constraints on his departure, but because leaving would be an act he cannot bring himself to commit, and that inability to leave is built on a foundation that is more complex than simple devotion. Smithers has seen the plant. He has seen the violations. He has seen the skeletons in the basement, or whatever the equivalent is at his level of access to the facility's operations. He knows more about what Burns' plant has done to Springfield than almost anyone else alive. He has managed Burns' affairs closely enough and long enough to understand the mechanism of the contamination, the scope of the cover-up, the specific ways in which the plant's operations have damaged the community it sits inside. And he has stayed. Through all of it, he has stayed and managed and maintained and protected. The show frames this as devotion, and that framing is not wrong. But devotion that persists through that level of awareness, through the specific knowledge of what the person you are devoted to has done, is a more complicated thing than simple loyalty. It is a choice made, or a choice not made, over and over again, every time the information is present, and the possibility of a different path is theoretically available. Smithers has chosen Burns. He makes that choice continuously. And the cost of that choice is that he is a person who knows what the plant has done and continues to enable it, who understands the contamination and continues to manage the person most responsible for it, who has access to the truth of Springfield's situation and uses that access in service of keeping the system running. There is an episode in which Smithers is separated from Burns for an extended period and discovers that Burns cannot manage basic functions without him. Burns cannot dress himself, cannot navigate the simplest social interactions, cannot access the medical infrastructure that keeps him alive. The episode plays this for comedy, but the implications extend outward from the comedy. Burns' dependence on Smithers is total. The treatment schedule, the management of the disease equilibrium, the navigation of the political and business relationships that sustain the empire, all of it runs through Smithers. Burns is the name at the top of the hierarchy. Smithers is the operational spine. If Smithers left, the system would eventually fail. Not immediately. There would be a period of increasingly ineffective management as Burns tried to replace him with someone else or muddle through alone. But the specific competence that Smithers brings, the knowledge of how Burns's particular medical requirements work, the understanding of how the plant's particular arrangements function, that is not easily transferable. It was built through decades of proximity and involvement and attention. Whoever came next would be learning, and during the learning period, things would begin to fail. The show has depicted scenarios where Burns briefly loses Smithers and the resulting chaos begins almost immediately. These episodes resolve with Smithers' return and the restoration of normal operations, and the audience laughs and the question of what the chaos means is left behind with the episode. But the question is there. Smithers' presence is not just convenient, it is structural. The power that Burns holds over Springfield is partly Burns' own intelligence and resources and longevity. And partly it is Smithers, turning up every morning, managing the schedule, maintaining the protocol, ensuring that the machine keeps running. Smithers is the most loyal character in the show. He is also, in a way that the show rarely acknowledges, one of the most responsible for the continuity of what the machine does. That is not a comfortable thing to sit with. But it is true, and on some level, Smithers knows it. He stays anyway. Extended deep dive. Lisa and the cost of clarity. What it means to be right in a place that has agreed not to listen. Everything we have said about Maggie's strategic silence becomes more legible when you look at what Lisa's visibility costs her. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old, and has been 8 years old for 36 years, and in that time she has been the show's moral compass, its intellectual center, its most consistent advocate for the things that matter. She is the character who notices the right things, who asks the right questions, who understands the implications of what is happening around her and is bothered by them in a way that none of the other characters can sustain. She is also the most consistently isolated character in the show, the character who is most often right and least often heard, the character whose insight is acknowledged and then set aside, whose advocacy is respected and then ignored, whose emotional experience of being the person who sees clearly in a place that has organized itself around not seeing is depicted with a specificity and a compassion that the show rarely extends to any of its other characters in quite the same way. Lisa's intelligence is not a straightforward advantage in Springfield. It is a condition she lives with rather than something she can fully deploy in service of the outcomes she cares about. She understands the contamination theoretically before the radiation theory makes it explicit. She understands what Burns's plant represents for the community. She understands the dynamics of denial that keep Springfield from addressing its own reality. She understands the systemic forces that keep Homer at the plant, and Ned in the pew and Maggie in silence. And she says all of it, out loud, in various episodes, in various forms, with the particular voice of an 8-year-old child who is operating with an adult's grasp of complexity in a body and a social position that give her very little leverage over any of it. The community responds to Lisa with what can only be described as polite irrelevance. She is acknowledged, she is allowed to speak, she is sometimes even praised for her intelligence and her commitment to her principles. And then the people who praised her go back to doing exactly what they were doing before she spoke, because the acknowledged version of what Lisa says is much easier to integrate than the acted-upon version. This is not cruelty. Springfield does not treat Lisa with cruelty, at least not usually, at least not intentionally. It treats her with something harder to name and in some ways harder to bear. It treats her with the comfortable tolerance of a community that has made its peace with the presence of a correct person it has no intention of following. Maggie watched this from the crib, from the bouncy seat, from the floor with the toys spread around her. She watched her sister apply clarity to every situation and receive consistent tolerance and consistent non-engagement and consistent return to baseline. She watched what the visible deployment of intelligence costs in this particular environment, and she made the calculation that her intelligence is better served not being visible. The calculation is not wrong, the evidence supports it, but there is something worth saying about Lisa that the calculation tends to overlook. Lisa is not naive about what her visibility costs. She is not waiting under the impression that one more perfectly argued point will finally crack the community's consensus and produce change. She has been doing this for 36 years. She understands the returns. She continues anyway. Not because she expects a different outcome from the same inputs, but because she cannot be the person who stops. She cannot be the version of herself that retreats into strategic silence and watches everything clearly from behind the quiet surface of a chosen invisibility. She has tried to do things quietly sometimes. It does not last. The clarity keeps forcing its way out. She cannot contain what she understands. This is what Maggie has that Lisa does not more intelligence, not better judgment about what intelligence requires in this context, but the specific capacity for containment. the ability to hold the understanding without being compelled to express it. Lisa does not have that capacity. It is not a failing. It is constitutive of who she is. The understanding and the expression are not separable for her. She knows something and she says it because the alternative is not available to her. Maggie can wait. Lisa cannot wait. Both of them are right about their own situations. There is a season 5 episode that gives Lisa one of the show's most fully realized moments of emotional specificity. A string of personal setbacks accumulates, and she reaches the point where she can no longer maintain the composure that her position in the family requires. She breaks down. She admits to Marge that she does not know how to keep doing what she is doing, how to keep caring about the things she cares about in a place that does not care about them the same way. And Marge's response is not to tell her that she is wrong about Springfield, or that her intelligence will eventually be rewarded, or that the situation is going to change. Marge's response is to be present with her, to sit with her daughter in the specific difficulty of being the person Lisa is in the place Springfield is, not to fix it, not to reframe it, just to be there. That moment, quiet and specific, and not particularly funny, is one of the reasons the show has persisted for 36 years. Because underneath all the jokes and the resets and the impossibilities and the floating timeline, it keeps finding these moments of genuine emotional truth about what it is like to be people in the particular situations the characters are in. Lisa is in a situation that is genuinely hard, not because her life is tragic in an operatic sense, because being right in a place that has organized itself around a comfortable wrong is a specific kind of lonely that the show understands very well. She keeps being right anyway. Every episode. 36 seasons. That is not nothing. That is quite a lot, actually. Extended deep dive. The reset button and what it erases. Every catastrophe that Springfield forgot. The floating timeline has a companion phenomenon that deserves its own attention. The reset. Springfield does not just fail to age, it fails to accumulate. Events that should permanently alter the town's reality do not. Catastrophes that should leave lasting marks are fully resolved by the beginning of the next episode. Relationships that should be changed forever by what happened are intact and operating normally as if the change never occurred. The slate is wiped clean, consistently, predictably, with a thoroughness that goes beyond normal episodic television convention. Let us catalog some of what Springfield has forgotten. The dome. In the Simpsons movie, Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a level so severe that the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal agency operating within the show's universe, determines that the town must be physically sealed under a glass dome to prevent the pollution from spreading to surrounding regions. The dome is constructed. The residents are sealed inside. The entire town is classified by the federal government as a contamination zone requiring physical containment. This is not a minor plot development. This is the federal government determining that Springfield is so thoroughly polluted that it must be isolated from the rest of the country. This is the single most comprehensive official acknowledgement of the town's environmental situation that the show has ever depicted. By the next television episode, it is as if the dome never happened. No ongoing EPA oversight, no federal monitoring, no long-term consequences, no changed relationship between the federal government and the town that was sealed in glass. Springfield simply continues. The sun. Mr. Burns blocked out the sun. He built a device that prevented solar radiation from reaching Springfield and positioned it permanently to force residents to depend on his electricity for everything that sunlight normally provides. This is an act of unprecedented aggression against an entire community, a monopolistic strategy that makes every previous Burns scheme look modest by comparison. It was reversed. The mechanism was destroyed. And by the beginning of the next episode, Springfield had sun again, and the incident was not referenced with any consistency going forward. The town has been destroyed and rebuilt, invaded by outside forces, been the site of events that the show presents as genuinely world-altering within the logic of its own universe. And after each one, Springfield resets. The damage unhappens. The altered reality normalizes. The people who went through the catastrophe lose the threat of it by the time we see them again. The principal and the pauper, as we discussed earlier, showed you the mechanism for this. Springfield chooses to reset. The community has a collective agreement, sometimes explicit and formal, as in that episode, sometimes unspoken and maintained through social pressure, to treat certain events as not having permanently counted. The vote is always available. The judge is always ready to issue the decree. The railroad car is always there. But here is the thing about the reset that connects it to the radiation theory in a specific and disturbing way. Memory requires intact cognitive function, the capacity to maintain a continuous narrative of past events, to hold the thread of what happened and connect it to what is happening now, depends on the neural machinery of memory being in good working order. If the contamination from the nuclear plant has been affecting the cognitive function of Springfield's residents for decades, it has been affecting, among other things, their capacity for sustained memory. It is not that Springfield forgets between episodes because the show does not care about continuity. Springfield forgets between episodes because the contamination has compromised the specific neural function that would allow residents to sustain their awareness of what happened over time. The dome happened. The residents experienced it. And then the cognitive architecture that would allow them to hold onto that experience, to integrate it into their ongoing understanding of their situation, fails. The memory of the dome exists, somewhere in the biology of everyone who lived through it. But the architecture that would allow it to be accessed consistently and connected to current experience is not intact. This is what chronic neurological damage from environmental contamination does to populations. It does not erase individual memories in the way that specific trauma affects specific memory systems. It degrades the overall function of the memory architecture in ways that make sustained narrative, the kind of narrative that would allow a community to say, "We went through this and we must account for it," much harder to maintain. Springfield's amnesia is not chosen, not entirely. It is symptom. The vote to maintain the lie about Skinner's identity is one expression of it. The inability to sustain awareness of the dome and its implications is another expression of it. The failure to connect Blinky to the yellow skin, the failure to connect Homer's cognitive impairment to his workplace environment, the failure to connect Burns's weekly treatments to the glow they produce, to the plant that produces what makes the treatments necessary. All of these failures of connection happen in a population whose connection-making machinery has been damaged by decades of exposure to the thing they are failing to connect. The system is elegant in the worst possible way. The contamination damages the cognitive function that would allow the contaminated population to understand the contamination. The cause protects itself from discovery by degrading the very mechanism that would discover it. Burns built a nuclear plant. The plant contaminated the environment. The contamination damaged the cognitive function of the residents. The damaged cognitive function prevents the residents from connecting the yellow skin to the plant, or the three-eyed fish to the water, or the reset between episodes to the mechanism of the reset. And the plant continues to operate, uncontested, because the population it has contaminated cannot sustain the thread of thought that would produce the contest. That is not a comedy. That is a closed system. A self-sustaining loop that has been running since the first episode and will keep running as long as the plant operates and the treatments keep Burns alive and the safety inspector keeps falling asleep at his console. The reset is not a narrative convenience. The reset is the point. Extended deep dive. What Springfield knows about America. The mirror that has been held up for 36 years. There is a specific observation about The Simpsons that the show's own creators have made in various interviews over the years, phrased in different ways but pointing at the same thing. The show is a satire of American life, and satire works by showing you something true about the thing being satirized in a way that is legible from the outside. What The Simpsons shows you, from the outside, is a version of American working-class life that is recognizable in its textures and its anxieties and its specific relationship to the institutional forces that shape it. The nuclear plant does not just represent nuclear power. It represents the extractive industry that operates in communities that depend on it economically, that produces environmental harm as a byproduct of its operation, and that sustains its position through a combination of economic necessity and political influence that makes challenging it very difficult for the people most directly affected. Burns does not just represent one evil billionaire. He represents the owner class as it functions in relation to the working class, the specific dynamic in which the person at the top of the economic hierarchy has the resources and the information and the access to protect his own position, while the people whose labor sustains his position lack the resources, the information, and the access to effectively challenge it. Homer does not just represent one specific underperforming employee. He represents the working class as it has been managed into a position of dependency, shaped by circumstances partly of its own making and partly imposed from outside, trying to sustain a family and a life on wages that have been effectively controlled by the employer since before the employee arrived. Marge does not just represent one patient spouse. She represents the domestic labor that holds the family together, the management of daily life and emotional need, and household maintenance and child-rearing that the show has always depicted as both exhausting and essential. And Lisa does not just represent one precocious child. She represents the political and intellectual conscience of the left, trying to name what is wrong with the system in a context where the people most directly harmed by the system are also the people least positioned to change it. These are not subtle mappings. The show has always been explicit about what it is doing. It is a satire of a specific version of American life, and it has been depicting that version, with variations and elaborations and the particular absurdities that 36 years of storytelling require, since the beginning. The question that the show has been asking, quietly, persistently, in the background of every joke and every reset and every impossible survival, is what it means to live inside this system, what it costs to be Homer in Burns's plant, what it requires to be Marge in Homer's house, what it does to you over time to be Lisa in a community that acknowledges you and does not follow you, what it produces in the person who is least visible and most observant to be Maggie in a family that does not quite see her. The show does not answer these questions with the kind of resolution that dramatic narrative usually delivers. It does not produce a moment where the contamination is exposed and Burns is held accountable and Springfield finally understands what has been happening to it. It produces instead the continuous, patient, relentless depiction of the system operating, episode after episode, with the same characters in the same positions, the same dynamics playing out at a slightly different angle each time, the same fundamental situation persisting. Because that is what the real version of this situation looks like. Not a dramatic exposure, not a moment of collective realization, just the continuous operation of a system that has made itself very difficult to change, sustained by the inertia of economic dependency and cognitive limitation and collective denial, and the specific way that comfort, even contaminated comfort, is preferable to the difficulty of the alternative. Springfield is not a prediction of America. The show's creator has said as much. He was describing what he saw when he looked at America in 1989, and what he saw was this: a working-class family trying to maintain its life inside economic and institutional structures that were not designed with its welfare as the primary concern. A community organized around an employer that damaged it. A billionaire whose continued presence was required for the economy to function, regardless of what that presence cost. He drew it yellow, he put it on television, and America watched, and recognized itself, and laughed. That recognition has not required any particular revision over the following 36 years. Springfield still looks like America. America still looks like Springfield. The plant is still running. Burns is still glowing. Homer is still sleeping at his console. And the people of Springfield are still not asking the most basic question available to them, the one that sits underneath every mystery we have explored tonight. Why are we all like this? The answer is in the cooling towers. The answer is in the river. The answer is in every yellow face that lives downwind of the plant that Burns built and never fixed and never will fix, because fixing it would mean answering the question, and answering the question would mean examining the system, and examining the system would mean changing the system, and changing the system would mean that Burns would have to answer for what the system has done. And Burns does not answer for things. Burns is too expensive to be held accountable. Burns is too old and too well-resourced and too thoroughly embedded in every institution that would otherwise hold him responsible. Burns just keeps having his weekly treatment and keeping the lights on and letting Homer sleep at the console. And Springfield keeps going. It always does. A final note on the mysteries that have no answers. Why open questions are sometimes more honest than closed ones. We have spent a long time in Springfield tonight. We have walked through its impossible geography and sat by its contaminated river and examined its floating timeline and tracked its most persistent mysteries from the origins to wherever the present episode leaves them. And the thing that stays with you when you have gone through all of it is not the mysteries themselves. It is the show's particular relationship with mystery. The way it builds questions carefully and then protects them from resolution with the same careful deliberateness with which it built them. The show could have told you where Springfield is. It has chosen not to. The show could have committed definitively to who shot Burns. It chose to give you an answer and then hollow it out. The show could have explained why nobody ages. It has chosen to build 5 possible explanations and leave all 5 available simultaneously. The show could have shown you Maggie speaking. It has chosen to keep her silent across 36 seasons of episodes. These are not failures of storytelling, they are decisions about what storytelling is for. Open questions are not a problem to be solved. They are an invitation to keep engaging. They are the show's acknowledgement that the most interesting things about human experience are not the things that get resolved, but the things that persist, the things you keep coming back to because you have not quite found the right way to think about them yet. The contamination, the dream, the vote, the silence, the immortality, the geography, all of it open, all of it available, all of it waiting for whoever is willing to look at it carefully and think about what they see. The show has been doing this for 36 years, and it has not run out of questions yet. Neither have we. That seems like the right place to be when you are settling in for the night in an impossible town, watching an impossible family navigate an impossible situation with the particular combination of love and chaos and resilience and failure that makes them the longest-running family in the history of American television. The questions are patient. The town is permanent. The family is there. Get some rest. The mysteries will still be there in the morning. They always are. End of script. Estimated total, 42,000 plus words. Formatted for 11 Labs voiceover, recommends slow, warm narration pace, natural paragraph breathing, no dramatic urgency. Extended deep dive. The coma theory and what it does to every episode you have ever watched. A complete rereading of 36 years of television. There is a date that, once you know the coma theory, you cannot stop thinking about. The 1st of April 1993, the 18th episode of Season 4. A show called So It Has Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. April Fool's Day. That is the day Homer Simpson entered a coma. That is either a meaningless coincidence or the most deliberate joke the writers ever constructed, depending on how you read the show's relationship with its own mythology. Here is what happened in that episode, slowly, because the details matter more than they usually seem to. Bart was playing April Fool's pranks on Homer throughout the day, escalating each prank beyond the last. The final prank involved a beer can. Bart took one of Homer's beers to an auto body shop and placed it inside an industrial paint shaker, which is a machine that vibrates with considerable force to mix paint to a consistent texture. He shook Homer's beer in that machine and then put it back in the refrigerator. When Homer opened it, the resulting explosion was severe enough to send him to the hospital. He was recovering in his hospital bed. He was awake. He was coherent enough to see a vending machine across the room. He wanted a candy bar. He reached for it. The vending machine tipped forward and crushed him. This is the moment. This is the moment that the coma theory identifies as the pivot point around which the entire show turns. Homer flatlined. He entered a clinically unconscious state. He was in a coma for 7 weeks of in-show time. The episode ends with what appears to be his recovery, Bart crying at his bedside, Homer springing awake and immediately strangling his son, the family laughing. Normal is restored. The show tells you he woke up, but the final moments of that same episode contain a detail that the coma theory rests on. The doctors inform Homer that he has lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5%, they say, gone permanently, never returning. Homer does not understand why he is laughing when they tell him this. He says so. He says he does not understand why this is funny. The family finds it charming. The episode ends. Now, the coma theory says Homer never woke up. The recovery scene is part of the dream. The laughter Homer cannot explain is the laughter of a man whose brain is already generating a world he has lost the thread of, already creating the simulation that will run for the next 32 years of television. And the evidence the theory points to is not circumstantial. It is woven into the structure of what the show became after that date. Before April 1993, The Simpsons was a particular kind of show. It was grounded. That word gets used loosely, but it means something specific here. The plots concerned recognizable human problems experienced by a recognizable human family. Homer tried to stop drinking. Marge questioned her marriage. Bart struggled with academic failure and the social consequences of being the kind of kid that teachers had already decided was a problem. Lisa searched for connection in a household that did not quite speak her language. These were domestic stories told through the lens of animated satire, and they were rooted in the specific anxieties of working-class American family life. Money was tight, emotions were real, the stakes were the stakes of actual lives. After April 1993, the show became something different. Homer went to space, not in a dream sequence, as the actual plot of an episode. He was selected to go on a NASA mission because NASA needed a civilian representative and Homer fit a specific demographic profile they were targeting. He went to space and came back, and the episode was a normal episode of The Simpsons. Homer joined a secret society. The Stonecutters, a parody of Freemasonry, turned out to have Homer as their prophesied chosen one, evidenced by a birthmark. He became their leader. This was a normal episode. Homer discovered his mother, who had been dead for his entire remembered life, was actually alive and had been living as a fugitive for decades because she had participated in the bombing of a biological weapons laboratory owned by his employer. This was an episode. Homer met God. Twice. Actual God, on screen, speaking to Homer directly, in episodes that are not dream sequences and are not framed as Homer's imagination. Homer befriended Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson, though in that case it was complicated by the fact that the voice actor was not actually Michael Jackson, but the character presented himself as Michael Jackson, and the show treated the encounter as real within its universe. The escalation from the first 3 seasons to the seasons that followed April 1993 is not subtle when you look at it directly. It is a complete shift in the register of what the show considers a normal plot, and the coma theory has the simplest possible explanation for it. The brain generating the dream has become detached from the constraints of realistic storytelling because it is a brain in a coma, not a person experiencing the world. Dreams do not observe the rules that waking life observes. A comatose brain receiving ambient stimuli from the hospital room, processing fragments of conversation and television and radio that it cannot fully interpret, generates narratives that borrow from those fragments and assemble them according to the logic of dreams, rather than the logic of experience. The celebrity appearances are voices from the television in Homer's hospital room, absorbed and incorporated as dream characters. The increasingly improbable plots are the natural output of a dreaming brain that has lost the stabilizing constraints of sensory experience. Homer goes to space because his dreaming brain has heard something about space on the hospital room television and has incorporated it into the simulation. Homer meets famous people because the television in the hospital room mentions famous people and his dreaming brain populates the dream with them. Homer joins secret societies and discovers his mother is a fugitive and meets God, not because these things happen in the real Springfield, but because a dreaming brain, cut off from reality, fills its simulations with whatever material is available. And nobody ages because the brain cannot generate aging it has not witnessed. Homer went into the coma in April 1993. His children were 10 and 8 and 1 at that point. He has not been present for a single birthday since then. His dreaming brain has no reference material for what an older Bart or an older Lisa or a walking, talking Maggie would look like. It cannot generate what it has not experienced, so it keeps them exactly as they were on the last day he saw them, frozen at the ages he last knew them, preserved in the amber of the last clear image his waking mind recorded. That is the most emotionally devastating part of the theory. Not the surreal plots, not the celebrity flood, not the tonal shift, the children who never grow up, the wife who never changes, the house that always looks the same, all of it frozen at the last moment Homer was actually present for it. His deepest wish, expressed through 32 years of dream television, is the simplest wish a father can have. He wants to be home. He wants Marge on the couch and Bart doing something he should not be doing, and Lisa playing her saxophone somewhere upstairs, and Maggie in her bouncy seat looking at him with those enormous dark eyes. He wants all of it preserved exactly as it was. He wants the last thing he saw before the vending machine fell to be the permanent state of the world. And in the dream it is. The show will never confirm this. The executive producer denied it on the record in 2015. The writers have addressed it obliquely and then declined to commit. There is a scene from a later season that appears to show Homer waking from a coma, produced and then immediately attributed to hackers who inserted it into a legitimate episode, which is itself a strange thing for the show to do, with a theory it considers completely baseless. But the theory does not need confirmation. It carries its own weight. It explains the aging problem with more elegance than any other framework available. It explains the tonal shift with more precision than the alternative explanation of declining writing quality. It explains the increasingly surreal plots as the natural output of a deteriorating dream rather than the result of a writer's room running out of grounded ideas. And it reframes every episode you have ever watched. If the theory is true, then The Simpsons is not a comedy about a family. It is a document of a man's unconscious mind, running its simulation, rebuilding his family every episode from the same raw material, refusing to let the story end because the story ending is the thing he cannot allow himself to approach. Every time Homer survives, something impossible. Every time the episode resets and the family is intact again, every time the credits roll and Springfield is whole and the house is still standing on Evergreen Terrace, that is not lazy writing. That is a man who cannot stop dreaming about going home. And we have been watching him dream for 32 years, laughing at the jokes, marveling at the guest stars, arguing about the golden age and the decline, without fully reckoning with the possibility that everything on screen since April 1993 is something much quieter and much sadder than a television show. It is a man in a hospital bed, refusing to wake up, because waking up means finding out what he missed. Extended deep dive. The predictions and why the real explanation is stranger than the conspiracy. What it actually means when a show writes the future before it happens. The conversation about The Simpsons and its predictions has been running for long enough that it has developed its own mythology, its own canonical examples, its own recursive quality where the show that is supposedly predicting things has now predicted, in various ways, the conversation about the show predicting things. Let us start with the most famous one, because starting anywhere else would be dishonest about what drove this phenomenon into mainstream consciousness. The year 2000, Season 11, an episode called Bart to the Future. The premise of the episode involves Bart getting a vision of his adult life, and in the margins of that vision, as a contextual detail rather than a plot point, we see that the President of the United States is Donald Trump. The episode does not dwell on this. It is not the joke. It is the backdrop against which the actual joke takes place. Lisa, as the first female president, is dealing with the catastrophic budget deficit left by her predecessor. The predecessor is identified as Trump. The line is played as an example of how badly things could theoretically go. 16 years later, Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. The internet's response to this was, in its initial form, genuine astonishment. The show had named a specific person, not a president type, not a celebrity businessman archetype, but Trump by name holding the office. And the detail about the escalator in a later scene, which visually echoed Trump's actual announcement of his candidacy in 2015, compounded the astonishment. The show had not just gotten the name right, it had gotten a specific visual detail right. The explanations that followed were predictable because they fell into two camps that are always available in these situations. The first camp said it was prophecy, time travel, some form of genuine foreknowledge embedded in the show's writing staff. The second camp said it was coincidence, selection bias, the natural result of a show that has run long enough to have said so many things that some of them were bound to align with what eventually happened. Both camps are partially correct and both miss something. The writer of the episode, Dan Greeny, has spoken about the Trump detail in subsequent interviews. His account is straightforward. Trump had been publicly floating the idea of running for president since at least the late 1980s. He was a specific, named, real person who had made specific, named, real statements about political ambitions. The writers were not predicting the future. They were extending a real trajectory that the subject of the prediction had himself established. Trump talked about running for years before he ran. The writers took that at face value and used it as a punchline. The show did not predict Trump. The show listened to Trump. This is the real explanation for most of the predictions, and it is more interesting than either the prophecy camp or the pure coincidence camp. The Simpsons writing staff, which has historically included graduates of elite universities across multiple disciplines, is paid to watch American culture carefully and find the gap between where things are and where they are absurdly heading. That gap is where satire lives, and closing that gap, in the form of a joke set in the future, produces things that look like predictions when the gap actually closes in reality. The Disney acquisition of Fox. The show joked about this in 1998, depicting a hypothetical mega-corporation scenario. The joke was based on the accelerating trend of media consolidation that was already visible and accelerating. The specific companies involved were logical targets given their positions in the market at the time. The joke did not predict a specific deal. It observed a trend and followed it to an obvious conclusion. When the conclusion actually materialized, 21 years later, the joke looked prescient. The Higgs boson equation. In 1998, a mathematician working on the show included an equation in a background detail of an episode that, when examined by actual physicists after the Higgs boson was confirmed in 2012, turned out to come close to predicting the particle's mass. This one is genuinely unusual. Not because the writers had foreknowledge of particle physics that did not exist yet, but because the mathematician involved was working from the actual physics and the actual math that was available in 1998, extrapolating where the equations pointed, and embedding that extrapolation in a background joke that nobody was expected to actually solve. The physics caught up with the extrapolation. The smartwatch detail. The 1995 episode showed a wrist-mounted device for communication that visually resembles what became the Apple Watch in 2015. This is the pure trend extrapolation case. Technology miniaturization was already visible and accelerating in 1995. The idea that wrist-worn technology would eventually include communication capability was not a mysterious insight. It was the obvious direction of a trend that anyone paying attention could identify. The flu from Asia. A 1993 episode depicted a flu virus originating from Asia, spreading to Springfield, causing panic buying and mass illness. This one circulated heavily in 2020 when COVID-19 appeared. It is the clearest example of the selection bias problem. Flu viruses originating in Asia have been a recurring public health concern for most of the 20th century. A show depicting a flu outbreak was not predicting COVID-19 specifically. It was depicting a type of event that recurs in recognizable forms. When COVID-19 arrived, the episode looked prophetic because the audience matched the template to the specific instance. The murder hornets detail, where Asian giant hornets appeared in the United States during 2020, is the overlay that made the flu episode feel especially eerie. Two things from the same real-world moment happened to both appear in the same fictional episode from 1993. This is coincidence in the strict sense, but it is the kind of coincidence that, once noticed, is very difficult to experience as mere coincidence. And here is where the meta-theory becomes the most interesting part of this whole conversation. The Simpsons has made thousands of satirical observations about American culture over 36 seasons, thousands of extrapolated trends, thousands of named specific entities used as punchlines for where those trends were heading. Most of them have not materialized. The jetpacks have not arrived, the moon colonies have not been built. Several specific political outcomes the show anticipated went a different direction. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody builds theories around the predictions that failed. The internet's relationship with the Simpsons predictions is one of the cleanest examples of confirmation bias operating at cultural scale. We remember what aligned and forget what did not, and the highlight reel of alignments becomes the evidence for the conspiracy. But here is the thing that confirmation bias cannot fully explain away. 36 seasons of content, produced by one of the most educated writing staffs in television history, tracking American culture with the specific attention that satire requires. That is a genuinely unusual amount of careful observation of a specific society over a specific period of time. The predictions that hit are not random. They are concentrated in areas where the writer's cultural analysis was most acute, which is also the areas where the underlying trends were most clearly legible if you were paying close attention. The show did not predict Trump, but it understood the cultural conditions that produced Trump better than most political analysts did at the time. The show did not predict the Disney-Fox merger, but it understood the economic logic of media consolidation more clearly than most industry observers were prepared to articulate in 1998. The show did not predict COVID-19. But it understood that respiratory pandemics originating from Asia were a recurring historical reality that would recur again, because that is what the history of respiratory pandemics suggested. The predictions are a window into the show's analytical precision, not its foreknowledge, its precision. And there is one more dimension to this that rarely gets discussed. The show's predictions, once they are identified and circulated, change how people understand subsequent real-world events. When Trump announced his candidacy in 2015 and descended that escalator, millions of people had the Simpsons episode as a reference point. The joke existed in cultural memory. The real moment was experienced through the lens of the fictional one. This does not mean the show caused Trump's presidency, but it does mean the cultural imagination that absorbed the show's satirical image of a Trump presidency was slightly different, in a way that slightly affected how that possibility was processed when the possibility became reality. The show shapes the cultural imagination. The cultural imagination shapes how reality is understood and processed. The understood and processed reality begins to resemble what the show depicted. This is not prophecy. It is feedback. It is the particular way that sufficiently influential satire interacts with the culture it is satirizing, becoming part of the background against which the culture understands itself. Springfield does not predict America. Springfield has become part of how America understands Springfield. And that loop, that recursive relationship between the satire and the thing being satirized, has been running for 36 years. That is what makes the predictions feel supernatural, not foreknowledge. A mirror held up long enough that you forget it is a mirror and start thinking it is a window. Extended deep dive. Hans Moleman and what immortality actually looks like from the bottom. The most killed character in animation and what his survival means. His name, as the show eventually clarified across multiple contradictory episodes, is Hans Moleman. He is small. He is old-looking, or old-shaped, in the way that a person can look old without the chronology quite supporting it. He walks slowly. He sees poorly. He wears a hat that appears to have been chosen in a different decade for a different person and simply never replaced. He dies constantly. Not in Treehouse of Horror episodes, which exist in a separate continuity where death is explicitly permitted as a plot device. In regular episodes, canonical episodes, episodes that are part of the show's actual ongoing universe. Hans Moleman has been killed or has appeared to die in a number of ways that no individual tabulation has fully captured, because the show has been doing it for so long and so casually that not every instance has been cataloged. He has been hit by cars, buried alive, incinerated, electrocuted, crushed by falling objects, consumed by animals, struck by projectiles. The deaths are not dramatic. They are quick and almost ambient, treated as background events rather than plot points. The camera notes the death and moves on. Moleman does not get death scenes with weight or significance. He gets deaths that the show uses the way it uses sound effects, as punctuation. And then he comes back. Every time. By the next episode, or sometimes by the next scene, Moleman is alive again and available to be killed again. The show never explains this. It never gestures toward an explanation. He simply persists. Now, within the context of everything we have explored tonight, Hans Moleman is either a throwaway gag that has been running long enough to become a tradition, or he is the most extreme data point in the theory that Springfield's environment produces biological anomalies. If the radiation has altered the cellular biology of Springfield's residents in ways that produce the yellow skin, and the four-fingered hands, and the bulging eyes, and Homer's near indestructibility, then Hans Moleman may represent the far end of a spectrum. Not ordinary radiation mutation, but something more complete. A cellular structure so thoroughly altered by decades of exposure that the normal finality of fatal trauma does not apply to it. He does not survive his deaths the way Homer survives injuries. Homer endures damage and recovers through an accelerated healing process. Moleman appears to actually die, to actually cease functioning, and then to reconstitute. This is a different category of thing. Homer's resilience is about damage tolerance and recovery speed. Moleman's resilience, if we take it seriously, is about something happening after death that brings him back. What the radiation has done to his biology is not just making him hard to kill. It appears to have altered his relationship with the finality of death itself. His stated age is 31. In the episode where this comes up, he says it plainly, as a direct answer to a direct question. He is 31 years old. He looks 80 or older. He moves like a very old man. His visual presentation in every episode is consistent with advanced age. If he is telling the truth, something has aged him catastrophically and rapidly in a way that has no normal biological explanation. Unless the radiation has not just altered his cellular regeneration capacity, but has also accelerated some processes while slowing others, producing a person who ages outwardly at a rate far beyond what his chronological age would predict, while maintaining a biological resilience that prevents the aging process from killing him, the way it would kill a person aging. Normally, he looks ancient. He cannot die. He is 31. The radiation theory has an answer for this that the show does not provide. He absorbed something early and heavily, either through his particular proximity to the contamination source or through some specific exposure event that the show has not depicted. The absorption aged his exterior rapidly, while simultaneously altering his cellular structure in a way that makes fatal damage not final. He is the most complete mutation in Springfield, the most thoroughly altered, the most visibly marked by what the environment has done to the people living in it. And because he is small and old-looking and peripheral, because he is not one of the Simpsons or one of the major recurring characters, the town does not notice what he represents. He dies in alleys, and at the edges of crowd scenes and in the background of episodes where the plot is happening somewhere else, and nobody in Springfield investigates the smallest, most frequently dying man in the community, because investigating him would require noticing him, and noticing him would require paying the kind of attention to the margins of Springfield that the town has very carefully declined to pay. Under the coma theory, Molman is something different and, in its own way, equally unsettling. He is a background character in Homer's dream who Homer's brain does not maintain consistently enough to keep alive between scenes. He is a prop that the dream occasionally discards and then reconstitutes because the dream needs a certain density of background population to feel like a town. His deaths are not narrative events. They are the dream's version of a dropped signal, a brief failure of the background rendering that the dreaming brain patches over before the next scene requires him. Under the collective denial theory, he is the most extreme example of Springfield's agreement not to notice the things it has decided not to notice. A man dies in public, repeatedly, with witnesses present, and nobody calls for an investigation. Nobody demands accountability. Nobody even asks the obvious question of how the same man keeps dying and appearing fine at the next community event. Springfield has agreed not to notice Molman's deaths with the same thoroughness with which it has agreed not to notice Burns's green glow, or the three-eyed fish, or the yellow skin on every face. Every theory about Springfield finds Hans Molman and arrives at essentially the same conclusion. He is the thing the community has decided it is most comfortable not looking at directly. The most visible symptom of whatever is wrong, made invisible by his position at the edge of the frame. That is Springfield's particular genius. The most telling evidence is always in the margins. The most important questions are always in the background. The most alarming data point is always the small, old-seeming man that nobody is watching. He has been dying and coming back since the early seasons. He will keep dying and coming back. Nobody will ask why. That is the whole story, really. In miniature, the most killed character in animation is also the most forgotten. And in forgetting him, Springfield forgets the most complete demonstration it has of what its environment does to the people who live inside it. Hans Molman is 31 years old. The plant has been operating since before he was born. He will be at the next community event. Extended deep dive. Abe Simpson and the weight of what fathers do not say. The lies that get passed down and what they cost. There is a version of the Simpsons story that centers on Abe Simpson, and it is a version the show touches but does not fully commit to, because fully committing to it would require making the old man in the nursing home one of the most morally complex characters in the series. Abe is easy to read as a comedy figure. He is elderly and confused and tells long, rambling stories that turn out to be about nothing or about something so distant in time that it has lost all contemporary relevance. He lives in the Springfield retirement castle, which is itself a satire of the way American culture manages its elderly population by removing them from the main flow of life and placing them in facilities where they can be comfortable and out of the way simultaneously. He falls asleep in sentences. He complains about the modern world. He is, as a comic type, the cantankerous old man who has been left behind by progress. But Abe Simpson has done specific things that are not comic in their implications, and those things connect to the central conspiracy of the show in ways that the comedy surface tends to obscure. He lied to Homer about his mother. For his entire childhood, his entire adolescence, and the first 37 or 38 years of his adult life, Homer believed his mother was dead. Abe told him this. Abe showed him a grave. The grave belonged to Walt Whitman, the poet, which means Abe went to the trouble of finding an existing headstone that he could use as a prop for the deception. He did not just tell Homer his mother had died. He constructed a physical object to anchor the lie. He showed Homer a grave so that Homer would have somewhere to direct his grief and would not keep asking questions. The question that the show spends very little time on is why. Why did Abe decide that the lie was better for Homer than the truth? What was the calculation he made, either consciously or through the kind of intuitive decision-making that people under pressure tend to make, that produced the choice to tell a child his mother was dead rather than tell that child the more complicated truth? The show gestures toward an answer. Mona's situation was dangerous. She was a fugitive. Burns had identified her to the FBI. Contacting Homer, or allowing Homer to know she was alive, would have created a connection that Burns or federal authorities could potentially follow back to her location. Keeping Homer ignorant of her survival was, in a specific sense, a form of protection for Mona. If Homer did not know his mother was alive, he could not accidentally reveal information that would help people find her. This is a coherent protective logic. It is also a logic that made Abe the arbiter of what Homer was allowed to know about his own life. Abe decided that Homer would believe his mother was dead. Abe decided that Homer would grieve a mother who was not dead. Abe decided that Homer would grow up with that particular wound, the specific wound of maternal loss, shaping every relationship he subsequently had, making him desperate for approval, and terrified of abandonment and unable to function independently of the people he loved. And then Abe made a deal with Burns. The show reveals this in a later season. Burns had done something, or knew something, or was in a position where Abe had leverage over him and Burns had leverage over Abe, and the deal they struck was Abe's silence in exchange for Homer's job security. Burns would guarantee Homer's continued employment at the plant regardless of performance. Homer could make as many mistakes as his brain was capable of producing, could sleep at his console and eat donuts during emergency alerts, and throw food items into the reactor core, and Burns would not fire him. In exchange, Abe would not reveal whatever it was he knew that Burns wanted kept quiet. This deal is not a small thing. This deal is the mechanism by which Burns ensured that the most incompetent safety inspector at the most dangerous nuclear facility in Springfield would retain his position indefinitely. Homer's job security, which has been the source of bafflement for people who actually pay attention to how many documented errors Homer has committed, is not a comedy convenience. It is a contractual obligation between an old man and a billionaire, struck in secret, maintained through silence, and never explained to the person whose life it most directly controlled. Homer works at the power plant because Abe made a deal. Homer is unable to leave the power plant, or unable to recognize that he should, because the same cognitive damage that makes him incapable of the safety inspector job also makes him unable to trace the architecture of the situation he is in. He cannot follow the thread from his job security to Abe's deal, to Burns's motivation, to his mother's situation, to the biological weapons lab, to the reason Mona left and never came back. He cannot follow it because the plant that gave Abe the deal to keep him employed has also been producing the contamination that makes Homer unable to follow threads like this. The system protects itself by damaging the people it needs to not understand it, and Abe sits in the retirement home telling his rambling stories, occasionally revealing in the middle of an anecdote some detail from a past that the show has not fully explored, carrying the knowledge of what he did and what he agreed to and what it cost Homer without ever being asked directly to account for it. Homer loves his father. This is not ambiguous. The relationship is complicated, and the comedy depends on Abe's obliviousness and Homer's exasperation. But underneath the comedy, the show has always depicted a genuine and specific love between them. Homer does not know what Abe did. He does not know about the lie, or the deal, or the trade that shaped the fundamental conditions of his adult life. If he did know, it is not clear what he would do with the knowledge. His brain may not be equipped to process betrayal of that magnitude and that specificity from a parent. The show has depicted Homer receiving difficult information about his family and his past, and finding ways to integrate it that do not require him to fundamentally revise his understanding of the people he loves. This is not stupidity exactly. It is the particular resilience of a person who cannot afford to have the floor give way beneath him. But the floor has already given way. Multiple times, Homer just does not know it. Abe put it back. Abe smoothed it over. Abe told Homer his mother was dead and showed him a poet's headstone and let his son grow up on the wrong side of a lie that shaped everything, because the alternative was more dangerous and more complicated, and Abe was not sure he could manage it. He probably made the best decision he was capable of making at the time. That does not change what the decision cost. The gap between the best decision available and a good decision is where a lot of the damage in this show lives. Abe is in that gap. He has been in it since 1969. He will stay in it. The retirement home is comfortable enough. The stories are long and nobody fully listens, and the truth about what he knows and what he chose and what it produced is safe inside the rambling, lost in the anecdotes, buried under the accumulated weight of a very long life, full of choices that seemed necessary at the time. He was not a bad father. He was a father in impossible circumstances who made a set of decisions that compounded into something he could not undo and eventually stopped trying to. That is sadder than a bad father, actually. That is just a person doing what people do under pressure. And Homer, at the end of every episode, goes home. To the house on Evergreen Terrace. To Marge and the kids, and the television and the beer. Unaware of the architecture underneath the life he is living. Sustained by a deal his father made with the man who destroyed his family. Going home because home is all he has ever wanted. Going home because the dream will not let him go anywhere else. End of expanded script. Extended deep dive. The couch gag and what it has been trying to tell you. 36 years of the same joke and why it is not a joke. Every episode of The Simpsons begins the same way. The clouds part over Springfield. The title card appears. The music starts. The same music it has always been, composed by Danny Elfman in 1989 and unchanged in its essential structure for the entire run of the show. The family scatters from school and work and errands to converge on the house, rushing in from separate directions to reach the couch in the living room before the music ends. They sit down, they look at the television. The joke, if there is a joke, happens in the final moment before they all land on the cushions. The couch gag is one of the most discussed formal elements in the history of American television. It has been analyzed from every angle. It has evolved from a simple visual punchline into an elaborate tradition that has included work from guest animators, homages to other artistic traditions, philosophical meditations on the nature of the show itself, and some of the most formally inventive short-form animation ever produced for network television. But the couch gag's constant innovation sits on top of something that never changes. The structure is always the same. The family is scattered. The family rushes home. The family arrives at the couch. This is what every episode of The Simpsons is about, at the level underneath the plot. Whatever happens in the 22 minutes of story, the frame is always, the family is separated, and the family comes back together. Homer leaves for work, Bart and Lisa leave for school, Marge manages the house and the younger children, and then the episode ends, and the family is, in one form or another, intact. The separation resolves into reunion. The scattered pieces return to the couch. The couch gag is not just a formal element. It is the thesis of every episode made visible in miniature at the start of each one. Here is what this show is about: the family getting home. Now put this against the coma theory. If Homer has been dreaming since April 1993, then every episode of the show is Homer's mind performing the same basic act, scattering the family across a day's worth of experience and then reassembling them at the couch, letting them be apart and then bringing them together, running the simulation of the life he wants, the life in which the family always makes it home. The couch gag runs first, before the story. It runs the miniature version of the episode's essential act, and then the story begins, and the story elaborates on it for 22 minutes, and then the episode ends, and the family is home again. And next week the couch gag runs again because the dream needs to start over, because Homer's brain cannot let the story reach a conclusion that does not have the family on the couch. The gag has been running for 36 years. The family has been scattered and reassembled more than 700 times. The couch keeps receiving them. The television keeps being on. The music keeps playing. If the coma theory is true, this is what Homer Simpson needs. Not the plots, not the guest stars, not the social satire or the pop culture references or the increasingly surreal storylines. The couch. The family. The moment when everyone is in the same room. That moment runs before every episode. Before anything else. Before the story starts. Before the jokes. Before whatever impossible thing is about to happen happens. The family gets to the couch. Everything else in 36 seasons of television is detail. That is the thing underneath it. The family gets to the couch, and Homer sits down. And for one more episode, everyone is home. A closing thought, said quietly. We have been in Springfield for a long time tonight. We walked through its impossible geography and measured the distance between features that should not be neighbors. We sat with the river and thought about what runs through it. We spent time with Homer and the plant and with Burns in his treatment room, and with Maggie behind her pacifier, and with Lisa in the classroom where being right costs her something every day. We followed Mona's trail from 1969 to its conclusion. We looked at the sundial and read the letters both ways. We sat with Ned in the house the community rebuilt badly and waited through the moment he finally said everything he had been conditioned not to say. We looked at the couch gag. We thought about what it means that the family always gets there. Here is what seems true, after all of it. The Simpsons is a show about a family that loves each other in a place that makes love difficult. The contamination is real within the show's logic. The denial is real. The corruption is real. The impossible timeline and the reset and the accumulated damage and the conspiracy that runs from Burns's office through Abe's deal, through Homer's crayon to Mona's grave and back again, all of it is real, in the sense that the show has put it there and left it there for anyone willing to look. And underneath all of it, underneath every mystery and every violation and every erasure and every vote to criminalize the truth, there is a family sitting on a couch, watching television, together. That is not a small thing. It is, in some ways, the only thing. The thing all the noise protects, the thing the dream preserves, the thing the floating timeline was built to sustain. As long as the show runs, as long as the couch gag plays and the music starts and the family converges from their separate corners of Springfield to land in that living room, the family is together. Nothing has ended. Nobody has had to say goodbye. The beer is cold. The television is on. The family is home. Close your eyes, if you have not already. Let Springfield do what it has always done best, which is to be there when you need it. The same streets, the same houses, the same impossible town in its impossible place, full of its impossible people, running its impossible loop. It will be there tomorrow. It always is. Sleep well. Full script complete. Total. Approximately 40,000 plus words. Formatted for 11 Labs voiceover narration. Pace. Slow, warm, unhurried. Paragraph breaks are breath marks. No urgency anywhere. One more thing before you go. On the experience of watching a show you cannot leave behind. There is a specific quality to the relationship that long-term Simpsons viewers have with the show that is difficult to describe precisely without sounding more sentimental than the subject perhaps warrants. But it is real, and it is worth naming, because it connects directly to everything we have been discussing tonight, and it might be the most honest thing to say at the end of 2 hours in Springfield. People who grew up with The Simpsons do not experience it as a television show in the way that most television shows are experienced. It is more continuous than that. It exists in memory, the way places exist in memory. The way the town you grew up in exists. Not as a sequence of events you can recount, but as a texture, a smell, a particular quality of light at a particular time of day. People quote it in conversation without thinking. The lines come up because they are already there, already part of the internal vocabulary that was assembled during the years of watching. Homer's expressions of pain and exasperation and delight, Bart's prank calls, Lisa's saxophone, Marge's specific sound of disapproval, that low hum at the back of the throat that means she has reservations but is going to try to be supportive. These are not just television memories. They are part of the furniture of the mind. And this is, when you think about it, what makes the show so suited to this particular format. To watching late at night, in the dark, in that half-awake state where the mind is still moving but the body has already decided to let go, The Simpsons is comfortable in a way that is distinct from being entertaining. Comfortable the way familiar things are comfortable. The way the sound of a specific song from your childhood is comfortable, or the smell of a particular meal, or the texture of a blanket that has been on the same bed for years. Springfield does not need to be interesting to hold you. It just needs to be there. And it has been there for 36 years. Which means for most people who are watching it at this hour, it has been there for most of their remembered lives. It predates some of their clearest memories. It has been a constant in a life full of the kind of change that makes constants feel necessary. The theories we have been discussing tonight are, at some level, an expression of this. The fact that people have spent enormous amounts of creative energy developing elaborate, internally consistent explanations for why the show works the way it does, is a measure of how deeply embedded the show is in the minds of the people who watch it. You do not build conspiracy theories about things you are indifferent to. You build them about things you cannot stop thinking about. Things that have gotten deep enough into your interior life that your mind keeps returning to them. finding new angles, testing new explanations, refusing to be satisfied with the surface. The radiation theory, the coma theory, the Maggie intelligence theory, the Burns immortality theory, all of it. The entire elaborate architecture of fan explanation and alternative reading and careful textual analysis is the audience's way of honoring a show that has been part of their lives for long enough that they feel they owe it the same quality of attention they would give to something that actually mattered. And here is the thing, it does actually matter. Not because the yellow skin is really caused by radiation or because Homer really is in a coma, but because a story that a culture returns to for 36 years, a story that embeds itself in the language and the imagination and the emotional reference points of generations of viewers, that story matters in the way that all sufficiently deep cultural artifacts matter. It tells you something true about the people who made it and the people who watched it, and the time during which both the making and the watching occurred. The Simpsons tells you something true about America in the late 20th century and the early 21st, about what working-class life felt like during that period, about the specific texture of the anxiety around work and money and family and the future, about the relationship between the people who run things and the people who live under the things that are run, about what it costs to be the person who sees clearly in a place that does not reward clarity, about the specific love that keeps a family intact through everything that should have broken it. That is what all the theories are circling. That is the thing underneath the jokes and the guest stars and the floating timeline, the love, the specific, imperfect, resilient, sometimes infuriating love of people who are stuck with each other and have decided, in some cases unconsciously, in some cases against their better judgment, that being stuck together is better than the alternative. Homer loves Marge with the desperate, grateful love of a man who cannot believe his luck and cannot afford to examine it too closely for fear it will turn out to be less solid than it feels. Marge loves Homer with the patient, weary, occasionally exasperated love of a woman who has seen all of him and not gone anywhere. Bart and Lisa love each other the way siblings love each other, which is to say combatively and constantly and in ways that could not easily be distinguished from a low-grade, ongoing conflict except by the people involved, who know exactly what the conflict is made of and what it protects. And Maggie. Maggie watches. Maggie listens. Maggie waits. Maggie loves her family with the complete, unspeaking love of someone who has decided that words are not the right container for the thing she feels, or who has decided that the silence is the best way she knows to keep it safe. That family, in that house, on that couch, it is still there. It will be there next week. It has been there since 1989. And whatever complicated, dark, strange, contaminated, dreamed, conspired, immortal, impossible, loving, broken, resilient thing Springfield actually is, it is the place that family calls home. And that, in the end, is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. Good night.